Okay, phones off, everybody. And this meeting is called to order. Monday, October 4th, 1:30 p.m. from the library. And Yvonne, would you please give instructions to if anybody wants to get connected, please?
The public can join the meeting by using Zoom at https://us0.web.zoom.us/J/837-856-64367. The webinar ID is the same, 837-856-64367, or you can also dial 699 area code 900-6833 and use the same web ID number 837-8566-4367.
Thank you very much. And we're charging you. Kevin.
He's bringing another one. Do we still need it?
80.
Well, we started.
Okay, so at this point, could we take attendance, please?
Sure. Mayor Cruz, Chair.
Present?
Councilmember Paula, Vice Chair.
Here.
City Manager Kelly.
Here.
Police Chief Ferguson.
Present.
And Director Susie Holmes.
Here.
Thank you.
Now, do we have any communication as of this date?
Chair, no communications included in the packet. Yvonne, was there any communications received after the agenda was posted?
There was a communication from Paul Veerman. However, he did contact me to let me know that he will not be able to make it to this meeting, and I will probably schedule some time for the next meeting. And I see no hands raised from the attendees.
Just a reference to the communication that was received via email. It was in regards to traffic concerns on North Washington Street. And our chief of supply was concerned. The resident has also shared some video documentation of what I think could be characterized as speeding vehicles. Appears to be students that are driving in excess of speed, and the chief is taking action to address those concerns, but we'll have it available for more communication, and then the chief is in direct contact with the resident that expressed concerns about driving.
So I believe you received that information from several of us.
I did, yeah. I immediately reached out to her and came up with a solution. And I've since contacted both parties, the vehicle drivers, had conversations with them, as well as put out to the troops that I have expectations that will be in the area, being the school closures, to make sure that we're present and visible to curb that. Certainly understand the frustration by the community member after watching the video myself. But I think we've come up with a resolution on this. And I did receive a positive feedback from the reporting person, the citizen, following Saturday when we put a bunch of enforcement out in that area. We'll continue to try to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now public comment. Members of the public may comment on any matter not on this agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. So anything you would like to add as public?
It's hard to talk with the mask on. I just wanted to make a comment on what we do for enforcement, especially when you have businesses that are not complying with COVID regulations.
Thank you.
What was the speaker's name?
Shirley Davis.
Thank you.
And are there any hands in the public?
No hands in the public.
Okay, thank you. We will follow up on that. Now, approval of minutes, June 7th.
Sure. Madam Chair, there's one correction on item 5B of the minutes. It should read measure P, not measure M.
Oh.
Measure P was the cannabis, measure M has got to do with a different tax measure. Okay, so with that, I'd like to move the approval as amended.
Right. Right, second. Okay. So, we will go ahead and approve the minutes.
Could you repeat who the second was? I'm sorry.
Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go on to current items for discussion. Pension obligation bonds for CalPERS pension unfunded actuarial liability debt. I guess this is a common practice at this point, right? And please give us some feedback.
Absolutely. I'll do an introduction on this item. And Yvonne, if you can bring in, we should have some attendees. Bill Falwell, as well as Mike Kavanaugh. And I think we'll ask Bill if there are other members of his team that he'd like to. Bill, can you hear us?
This is Mike Kavanaugh. I can hear you.
Hi, Mike. Is there other
And,
members?
this is Bill Fowle. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bill. Are there
Right.
other members of your team that you'd like to be able to speak for this presentation to our finance admin and police subcommittee? Bill, can you hear me?
Yeah, did you want me to review the present? Actually, we have a PowerPoint presentation, and also a staff report was done.
Bill,
And so I don't know if you want to go right into the presentation, or if you'd like Susie or I to review the staff report. Either way is fine with me.
Bill, can you hear me?
Yes, I
I'm
can.
asking you, is there other members of your team present that you'd like to have be participants in this presentation?
Oh, yes, thank you. James Warzeniak of Jones Hall, Mike Kavanaugh of Hilltop Securities, and then Brian Whitworth of Hilltop Securities, and myself and David Fama. Did I mention David Fama of Jones Hall? I believe is on, teed up as well. But I know James is on the call here, or on the Zoom.
Okay, Bill, we've got you, Mike, James, and David. I'm going to do an introduction, and then we're going to let you turn it over to do share screen. Will that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine. And I know that Susie did a staff report. I assisted with that. And so, David, I'll defer to you if you want us to try to go over the staff report, or have Susie do that, or if we just go right into the PowerPoint presentation. So I just defer to you on the sequence of events there.
Thank you, Bill. I was going to introduce you and the team and then turn it over to you for the presentation.
Okay.
Got it?
That sounds great.
Okay. All right. So Bill Fall, Mike Kavanaugh, James Warzeniak, and Dave Fama have joined us. Bill Fall is a financial advisor, a municipal advisor that supported the city recently with the refunding of our 2020 successor agency redevelopment bonds. We find ourselves in a very low interest rate environment, so it's very favorable to look at opportunities for either refunding existing bonds that were at a higher interest rate, or in this case, a bond issuance, potentially consider financing pension obligations at a lower rate than is offered by public employee retirement firms. This is a vehicle that is available to us as a city to issue pension obligation bonds to help finance our pension obligations, specifically our unfunded accrued liability portion, or you'll hear the term UAL. Bill approached us with his team about this opportunity again because the interest rates in that we currently are seeing in the market are much lower than the discount rate that the PERS charges us on an annual basis. So there's an opportunity for savings for our taxpayers. So ultimately, we wanted to bring this option forward. There's no requirement that we consider pension obligation bonds as completely a voluntary endeavor. But the team has put together a fairly detailed proposal that outlines the concept and what we would be generating in terms of savings. Again, we are one of the few cities in California that has an ad valorem tax, but ultimately would generate some savings in terms of a lower tax rate from on ad valorem to help pay our pension obligations. So that's kind of where the savings would be generated, is really at the taxpayer level. And we wanted to present this to the Finance Admin and Police to see if there's interest in moving forward. There's, again, no obligation, but there's, again, some savings that can be generated to help out the taxpaying community. So with that said, Bill, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. And if you want to walk both our Mayor Cruz and our Councilmember Joe Paula through your presentation along with your team, that would be greatly appreciated.
That's great. Okay, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Paula, we've put together a PowerPoint presentation. I also collaborated with Susie Holmes to put together a staff report that I presume the mayor and the Councilmember Paula have received that. If Susie, I can review that, or if you want to walk through it first, or we could jump right to the PowerPoint presentation. I'm happy either way. If you'd like me to hit the highlights on that, I can, or if Susie, you prefer to do that, that's fine.
Bill, I would recommend the agenda report was included in the packet, which was mailed or provided to council members last week. So they've had the opportunity to do it. So I think we should move to the presentation.
Okay, great. All right, thank you for that guidance. Okay, well then, as the David Kelly City Manager mentioned, I view this as an excellent refinancing or restructuring opportunity for the city that many local agencies in California are taking advantage with so low interest rates on taxable bonds. They're refinancing these pension obligations at rates much lower than being charged by CalPERS. So for example, like CalPERS, we anticipate it's going to be having a rate will charge all the local agencies about 6.5% on whatever your CalPERS unfunded liability debt is. And today we're estimating with taxable bonds, we could refinance that anywhere from 3.5% to 4%, and maybe even lower depending on the term of the financing. So it seems like there's a real opportunity there. So at that, I just wanted to mention that.
Bill,
Yeah.
Are you sharing the screen?
I don't know if I'm on the screen or not. I signed in on the first Zoom link, and I put my email address in.
You should see the icons at the bottom of the screen to share your screen.
Oh, to share. Let's see. Okay. Raise hand, mute. Well, I signed in on the first Zoom link. Maybe that's the problem. Is that why I don't see the share screen?
You are a panelist. You should have the ability to see the share screen. see.
Okay.
This is Mike Kavanaugh. I don't have that option either. Share.
Okay. Is the PowerPoint the one that was in the packet?
Yeah, it's in the package.
Okay, I'll pull it up and share it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it in front, but our viewers don't have it.
Can you tell me the name of the document?
It's titled General Overview of Pension Bonds, City of Cloverdale.
Okay.
It's on page
11 of the packet. Page 11 of the packet. That's where it is.
Let's see. Let me look in the packet. I'm sorry. It's just trying to. You say it's page 11?
Oh, no, it's page 19.
19, okay.
19 of 130, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this should be it. Okay, do you all see it?
Yeah,
I see it. Yes. Yeah, this is
Okay.
Bill. I see it.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
sure.
Okay.
Go on, Bill.
All right. Well, I'll let Mike go through that. The other person on the phone or firm is Jones Hall, James Forzeniak, and I believe David Pham is on as well. And they can talk a little bit about the required validation action. But Mike, I'll let you go through the presentation, and then after you finish, then we can address any questions or make any other comments.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And thanks everyone for having us today. So this is just it's a PowerPoint presentation and kind of a general overview of pension bonds. Please interrupt me if you have any questions, because I know we talk in public finance slang and sometimes it's the translations don't match. So if there's some confusion, please stop me and I'll address questions right there. So essentially, as Bill mentioned, you have an unfunded liability with CalPERS, which as of your August report was 11 million. Right here, I summarized on this first slide. If you go to the next slide, slide 2, there you go. Here's what we're projecting. So we're projecting CalPERS earned a lot. They earned over 20% this year. They are also, we think, lowering the discount rate. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but we estimate your unfunded liability, if we were to do a pay it off on April 30th of 2022, to be 9.5 million. It's lower than what it is now, but we're taking into account some gains and some other issues that happens every year. Specifically the large gain of 20%, but also we estimate that CalPERS is going to change their discount rate, which we won't know for sure until November, but that's our estimate. So we come to a payoff amount of 9.5 million to pay off 100% of your unfunded liability. If we go to the next slide, slide 3, it kind of shows you the difference between the black line is where you are now, and the green line is where we think you're going to end up after the May or November release of the discount rate. So what we're looking at here in these numbers internally will be assuming you become into the green outline or the green line here, which is your new amortization under CalPERS. Okay. Is everyone staying with me?
You know, the trouble too is Matt Pollan probably doesn't have too much knowledge about what's going on, but you know, I'll get.
Hey, David Pham, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So going into slide.
Yeah. Right. Let me see what
slide 4. You as a city are, I think, one of 13 in the state that have a pension override, which is very credit positive and obviously helps offset the cost for the general fund. So you're in a somewhat unique situation. We've done a couple transactions, Huntington Beach, Ontario, and Monrovia all come to mind. All have had pension overrides, and we've done financings for all of them. So one of the big steps in this process, and it's really kind of I wouldn't say it's something that it's something you should consider doing, whether you're doing pension obligations or not, pension obligation bonds or not. But this actuarial study will go over to make sure that you're funding the correct amount of levy and whatnot. But also, more importantly, for our discussions, it's really something we need to have done for if you want to move forward with a pension obligation bond. It's something in our process we have to do. So this is one of the few costs that would not be reimbursable, so to speak, if you didn't do a bond deal. So I just want to point that out here. And we have a few more slides in the back that we can touch on this later. But let's go to slide 5, and then slide 6 is really kind of a background and a kind of a 101 on pension obligation bonds. More or less, as Bill mentioned, CalPERS essentially is charging a 7% rate. We think you can refinance it in essence, and that's what we're doing, although it's technically called a restructure. But you issue taxable bonds to pay off your unfunded liability to get anywhere from 90 to 100% is what is recommended. And the reason why everyone's doing this is, quite frankly, because interest rates are so low. And we can show you the numbers here in a couple slides. But in essence, all these cities and anyone who has UAL debt right now is saving over 20% present value. So there are some concerns about issuing pension obligation bonds. It's a long process with a validation, but there are some real economic benefits. And I think that's why we're seeing a huge boost in issuance of these. If you go to slide 7, this is just a little snapshot of deals in California that were done this year. I want to say there's been more than 50 done this year, which is, I think it's 40 more than any other year ever. So obviously it's something we're doing a deal next week for the city of Lakeport, which is right up the road from you. So issuers such as this slide, 700 million, all the way down, but we're doing them as low as $1 or $2 million. And we estimate yours to be about 10 million, which is on the smaller side, but we're pricing a deal this week for a $5 million deal, and Lakeport, I think, is an $8 million deal. So their sizings are all across the board. And again, I specifically think it's because when you can show someone they're going to reduce their payments by 20%, it's kind of hard not to look at it and do it. But if I go into slide 8, here's some of the common goals, right, to issue pension bonds. A lot of our issuers see, if you remember the amortization, it spikes in the first few years. A lot of our issuers have a hard time budgeting when they have spikes in payments. So a lot of these the goals for these pension bonds is to make life easier on finance directors and planners to smooth out the process, right? So we issue, our debt service can be whatever form we want it. But as opposed to the bouncy, crooked lines that you currently have, most finance directors like a 15 or 20-year level debt service, right? So they know what it is. They can plan year in to year out. So one of the goals is to take out the payment spikes. Obviously, the expected borrowing rate of CalPERS is at 7%. Your borrowing costs are, anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5. So that's where we're producing savings. I think for your plan, because you have the override, it may make sense to try to pay it off sooner and pay off that debt sooner, which, brings your savings up to 30 to 40%, right? If you take a 20-year amortization and you could pay it off in 10 or 15 years. And we can get into these numbers here in a little bit. I think you're about 50 to 60% presently funded. We see a lot of issuers, they don't want to be 100%. A lot, the range is kind of, for some reason, 92, 93% funding is what most issuers are shooting for. And that's because, for instance, if you were 100% funded last year, but CalPERS makes a 20% return, which they did, now you'll be overfunded. And there's some negatives into being overfunded. So there's a reason why you all don't necessarily want to fund 100%, but it allows you to fund at whatever level you want. A part of our approach would be obviously to discuss long-term, establish a long-term plan for the city. You have You have a reserve requirement already in place. We like to work and establish pension policies and whatnot for future generations of staff and council. So everyone's kind of on the same page. And that's all part of the process that we would go through to help to make sure issues that other cities face don't don't creep up in your life, because you have the override. So I doubt they will, but there are a few. If I'm going to slide 9, GFOA does have a white paper out saying you should not issue pension obligation bonds. And quite frankly, here there are reasons why. The first reason is very valid. And this is the risk involved in the financing. And we can run all sorts of solutions or scenarios for you to give you an idea. But if you were to do a pension financing, or anyone would do a pension financing, and then fully fund and give CalPERS that big cash of money. Now, the issue would be if CalPERS turned around and lost a significant amount that year in their funding, right? They're up 20% last year. If they turn around and they're down 20%, that has a negative effect. So not only have you lost money with CalPERS, but you also have a debt service schedule that you have to meet. So there is a scenario where issuing pension bonds, and I want to say it's CalPERS has to lose 20% return over a number of years to which is it's never happened, but it is a risk, and it's a risk that you should know about. And we can talk about that a little more here in a couple slides. But these other issues that that GFOA has are really non-issues, and they were at one time. They used to issue indexing bond or variable rate bonds, right? Which isn't a very good strategy because those rates could end up being more. But we issue fixed rates, so that's not a concern for us. Issuing bonds that aren't callable, that used to be a practice, that's not a practice anymore. So we get rid of that issue with GFOA as well. One of the concerns GFOA has is it hurts your rating, but we view it, and S&P has told us it's actually beneficial that you're addressing a problem, and they look at it as a credit positive to the overview of the city health. And what we found is when we get these rated, they're all very high rated pension bonds. We ran our matrix, and we think you're in the AA category, which, you know, is the same as Huntington Beach was in the AA category. So we think you'll be very strong rating wise, and we don't think a pension obligation bond would affect that. As a matter of fact, we think it may help it, to be honest. So there's a few concerns here. I won't go through them one by one, but all but one of them, in our opinion, is addressed. And the one they have is a very valid opinion. So I won't say it isn't, but historically speaking, it has never happened. Why don't we go to slide 10? Obviously, here's some of the potential cons again. And the big one is the rate investment returns of CalPERS. If those turn out to be small or negative, the pension bond overall would not be very successful in the whole scheme of things. But as we show here in the next slide, that requires CalPERS to lose money, significant amount of money over a long period, and it's never happened. So here are the cons. I won't go through them all, but so on that slide, going in slide 11, here's the CalPERS returns. Obviously, they hit big negatives down here in 2009 or so, but we can show you, even if you did a bond deal that, you know, right before that collapse, because of the positive returns later, it never was harmful to issue pension obligation bonds. And we could demonstrate that in cash flows. But this is just to give you an idea of what CalPERS has done over the historical time period. So one of the other issues, I'm going into slide 12. One of the other issues with the pension obligation bond is that you need a summary judgment. So the concern with that, or not concern, but the issue with that, it could be 16, 17 weeks long, and it just delays the process of issuing bonds, which is neither here nor there. The cost is, and Jones Hall can speak on the cost, but the cost isn't very much. I think 20,000 is even a high number, and mostly that'll be, or all of it will be able to be reimbursed from bond proceeds if bonds are issued. The concern I always have as a finance guy is, and we've seen it recently, rates are going up. So I know where rates are today, but I won't know where they are in 16 weeks. So the lag in this process, and if you do want to start working on this and you say, hey, Hilltop Securities and Bill and Jones Hall team, you know, what we'll do is during this time frame is we'll start working on bond documents, and we'll start doing work that won't cost you anything unless the bond deal closes, right? All of our fees outside of the validation and a rating, if we engage a rating agency, are all the fees should be contingent upon closing. So what we'll do is, if you start this process, as soon as we start the validation process, we'll start working on the POS. We'll start getting everything in order. So when this time frame is up, we'll be ready to go. If I go to slide 13, here's where the good part gets. Here's we ran some simple savings numbers for you. So, and this is assuming we pay off all of your pension liability. So you're 100% funded. And what this says to me is, and we've kept it, if you notice, the red line is what this proposed amortization looks like. And strictly it's keeping your same amortization, but showing the same annual savings. So what we can say is we can refund this right now and save you $160,000 a year out to the end, out to 2038. So what is that? 16 years or so. Overall, that produces almost 3 million in savings, gross savings. And it's over 20% debt service reduction, which again is a strong number in the case for why a lot of cities are issuing this. So this is one amortization solution. If I go to slide 14 is a level amortization, right? If you see the red, that goes out to 2037. And again, we find issuers like this. It's easy to budget from year to year, right? You're cutting out those spikes, as you see, the blue spikes, so to speak, and your debt service is the red line. And this accounts for, you can't, the difference between the blue up top and the red below is the savings. And out there at the end in like 38, it looks like there's some dis savings, right? Where you have debt service where there wasn't before. But we can structure amortization to meet any ideas or concerns that you have, or if you have a certain dollar amount of tax override and you want to match that up, we can match with the amortization. So this is just to give you a couple ideas of how to do it. In the next slide 15, again, is something that I think it may be of interest. This, I think, would allow you to pay your debt off sooner, right? So the final maturity in this solution is 2033, as opposed to CalPERS, which you're paying out to 2045, I believe. So you're basically paying off debt earlier. And to me, if you have a tax override and you're already billing about $1 million, it may make a lot of sense to be able to prepay it. And if you did here, right, you see debt service reduction of almost 25%, right? Because you don't have those interest costs in those later years. So those are just 3 ideas of amortizations. And again, we can structure these to meet really any desire of the city, to be honest. If I go into slide 16, so what we have found, there's been a couple occasions is where we've taken pension bonds into the validation process, and there has been occasions where they have been contested, which turns out to be a legal fight. And if you're like me, legal fight, all I hear is money going to lawyers and taking time and nothing anyone wants to get involved in. So we developed a alternative approach, which we call lease revenue bonds. And there are a couple negatives, there's a couple positives, right? So the negative is you can issue lease revenue bonds, but your rating, we think you would be an A+, as opposed to pension obligation bonds where you'd be AA-, right? A lower rating like that will cost you more, anywhere we estimate from 10 to 20 basis points. And the other issue is when you do a lease, right, you need an asset to be the asset in the lease. What we found is, some of these cities are issuing $100 million of lease revenue bonds. It's kind of hard to find value with that amount of money. But we have developed a structure where you could lease the streets. And I won't get into all the details, and no one can take over your streets and take them back, but that's an asset you can use. It's been accepted. There's been a number of deals that's done that way. So it's a solution to a problem, I guess. The reason why you would do a lease is there's no validation needed. So right now, everyone's projecting interest rates to go up. You're going to save yourself probably 2 months, so 2 to 3 months. And in theory, and because I don't know what the market's going to be like in 2 to 3 months or 6 months or next week, but to be able to access the market quicker could be a reason to do lease revenue bonds. Again, apples to apples, they cost more, but they can be done quicker. And sometimes that's valuable. Just depends on what your thoughts are on interest rates, really. So slides 17, 18, and 19 really involve the pension override and why it's needed. I won't go into that. I'll just say that it will cost some money. It will take 4 to 6 weeks to do. Cost some money. It'll cost like $25,000. And that's done by Bartell and Associates, who they've already done some pension study work for you. And they are the top in the business in California with regard to pensions. So that really concluded my presentation. I want to say that Jones Hall and Bill all helped put this together. I just like to talk a lot. That's why I got to do it. But this is a group effort, and I'll leave it there.
Mayor and Chair, if I can, just real quick, I just want to introduce again, Bill follows the municipal advisor. Bill assisted us with the refunding effort for our redevelopment special agency bond. Mike is with Hilltop Securities, and they're the firm that actually, if they're retained, they're the ones that help sell the bonds. James Breziniak and Dave Fama are with Jones Hall. Jones Hall serves as bond counsel. So they're kind of similar to capacity city attorney, but specific to the financing. So that's their role is to ensure that all the documentation that's being produced, meets the legal test. And they look at it very carefully. They coordinate quite a bit with the city attorney, make sure that all of the appropriate documentation is in the findings and so forth, or in the resolutions. And then ultimately we're meeting all the requirements on the private side to sell those bonds. Basically, if anything goes wrong, we go to James and David for resolution. But Bill, in his role as a municipal advisor, really is intended to be our representative. Again, we can choose other municipal advisors. Bill has been the bonds that he helped us sell for our refunding effort was the second bond sale with the city. He previously worked with us on the original refunding of the redevelopment bonds that were done, I think that was 2013. So we've had experience working with Bill, and also bond counsel has been involved with the city. They've done quite a bit of research and background. They have kind of institutional and historic knowledge in working with the city. So, Bill, kind of turn it back to you. Is there anything you'd like to offer to our subcommittee members and follow up to Mike Kavanaugh's presentation?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David. Well, one thought I want to share with the mayor and the council member, Paula, is that, we don't have to make a decision today in terms of which structure. In other words, whether the city would issue pension obligation bonds that would have a validation action involved or lease revenue bonds. We can sort that out further. Personally, I kind of like the idea of just doing the plain vanilla pension obligation bonds, although as Mike pointed out, they're rising interest rate risk with that because it takes longer to get the bonds to market and lock in rates. But like I said, we don't have to make that decision. I think it has a lot of merit. Cities, local agencies throughout the state are doing this because they can save money. And yeah, the interest rate being charged by CalPERS could theoretically go down, but their investment returns would have to go down very significantly for many years. And so they're very loath to increase the discount rate or the rate they charge member agencies because it creates a financial burden. But I feel, in this current market, that it'd be a positive thing to move forward, the next step in terms of taking a serious look at this and moving forward. The out-of-pocket costs are very minimal. And most of the time, this would get done, the bonds would be issued, and any costs that the city had to advance up front could be paid back to the city out of the cost of issuance. But as Mike said, in regards the actual study on the pension tax, that has a lot of good benefits for the city, even if the pension bonds were never issued. And we would think that the cost of that could be paid out of accumulated pension tax revenues the city has already collected and has in hand. So, my thought is that the subcommittee would move forward with a recommendation to go before the city council for their consideration, subject to staff direction. We don't know, other things you have on your plate. I know you're doing your audit and other things, and we don't want this to interfere with other priorities in terms of processing things for approval. But we could be ready to go, pull everything together if the city manager wanted to schedule for the 13th of October or the 27th. The 13th of October meeting is coming pretty quick because your agenda deadline's Thursday. So, kind of my horse sense tells me that maybe the 27th of October would be, a little more palatable in terms of staff pulling everything together, but that's really a decision for staff. But I think this presents a really excellent opportunity. One thing that Mike didn't say, he's talking about 20%, 24%, where those are essentially what we call net present value savings. And in our industry, before a refinancing or a restructuring is done, we tell the industry standard you should have at least, say, maybe 5% net present value savings. And all these are upwards of 20%, and they could be much higher if you shorten maturity, which I kind of like that. I mean, if you have the pension tax, which is a great tool for the city, I personally kind of like the idea of paying that debt off quicker, shortening the maturity, kind of like paying off your credit card early. So, I just think you can't really go wrong with that if you have enough money to do it, and it wouldn't interfere with other obligations of the city. But ultimately, that's a city council policy decision. But we're happy to provide all the analysis that you might want to help you make the best possible decision. So anyway, I'm enthused about it, and we defer to staff in terms of what you think would be the logical next step. If there's a meeting date that the city manager would have in mind to bring this for the council's consideration, assuming, of course, the subcommittee would like to do that. So anyway, that concludes my remarks. I'll shut up and let you all talk.
I have a question. Is the advance payment date the same as the maturity date?
Can you say that one more time?
Yes, are you referring to the advance payment date as the same as the maturity date? Or could you make a distinction when you were making the presentation about 2034 versus 2045?
Oh, okay. Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, are you referring to paying off the amount that needs to be paid off, or our projected payoff amount?
Yes, as you mentioned, but you use those two terms, and I wanted to make sure that it was the same or if they're different. Advance payment date and maturity date.
Yeah, so a maturity date, I would be referencing a final maturity of the payment. So I think your current final payment, well, currently it's 2046. We estimate it's going to be 2041 after CalPERS makes all the changes that we'll know about in November.
Okay.
So right now, your debt with CalPERS isn't paid off to 2046. We're projecting they're going to change that. If you do nothing, they're going to change that amortization, and that payment, the new amortization we project, remember on the green and the blue, the green one will be paid off in 2041. And that's what we assumed in our numbers, that your current projected debt service will be paid off, have a maturity in 2041.
Right.
Okay, and so what is the 2034 date?
The 2046 date is,
No,
so
no,
you have,
2034.
24.4.
oh,
Page 15, page 15.
yeah, I just used as, there's nothing significant to that date other than that's, I kept debt service. What I did was I kept debt service under $1 million and paid your debt off sooner. So that debt, if you want to pay it all off sooner and keep a debt service around $1 million, then your final maturity would be 2034.
Right.
All right, thanks for the clarification.
So,
And there's nothing magical to that date. You know, that could be 2032, you know, could be anything you choose.
Thank you.
thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick comments. The first thing I want to say is thank you for the presentation. You know, it's an awful lot of information, and it's probably more than I would have ever expected, and I don't really want to pretend I understand it all. So I really think it's going to, I'm all for saving money, and I certainly would support moving forward if we could do that, certainly. But I'm not comfortable doing that at this phase. I really think we need to take a breath and go through this at a little slower pace and compare apples with apples. And so I get a little better understanding and a little better comfort level. It's just a lot of information and it's very fast, and it's moving a little quicker than I'm comfortable moving. Recognizing I know time may impact the cost, but I'm not comfortable moving forward until I have a little better in-depth understanding. So I would like to see maybe we have this back and we talk a little bit more, even if we do a little special meeting, just to go over this at a slower pace, so we can compare it with what CalPERS versus this refinance tool is and how that all looks, because I'm just not comfortable making that recommendation today. Just too much information and it's moving too fast and I don't understand it all.
Okay, I have another question, if I may, and that is on page 2. Well, page 7 of the packet, where it says that it would not exceed $25,000 of the cost. However, there would be, if we don't do anything, there's a $10,000 charge. The other potential out-of-pocket cost would be for the validation action. Could you explain that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of the precursor to this effort is to engage a firm in it. We work with Bartell Associates. They're kind of really one of the few firms that does this type of work, where they would perform actuarial analysis. Well, and at this particular time, that cost would not be reimbursable. We would pay for that expense so that we would have that information as part of this effort. We do as staff think that there are some benefits of, regardless of this effort of performing that study, just to really take a close look at our ad valorem and how we're calculating it to ensure that it's being done, absolutely correct. So it's just something you always want to kind of do with it periodically as an audit, just kind of make sure you're performing your calculations correctly. That would be an upfront cost, and we have to determine whether that's recoverable by the bonds or not. But I think what this is trying to elaborate on is that if we went through that process and we didn't, just an accountant decided not to move forward with the bonding process, that would be a cost that we would incur. And I think likewise with the 10,000, again, the validation effort is part of making the refunding or the bond issuance effective. That if we went through that and for some reason council said, we want to we don't want to move forward with bond issuance, that would be a cost that we would incur as the city because we would be getting reimbursed from the bond proceeds for that. So that's kind of that would be kind of the risk that we would be incurring, and from a cost perspective to start this effort, to do the actuarial study and then to do the validation effort. And we could do one or both or neither. If we didn't proceed, we wouldn't incur any of those costs. So I think Susie and I have been talking about the need to just a timing issue when we engage Parkell, bring it to council and seek council's approval to move forward with the actuarial study.
And that's my next question. What are the timelines to make a decision? I don't know if waiting until the next meeting would be sufficient time for us to still take advantage of this, if we were to agree on it, or is it before our next meeting?
Well, I think we want to make sure that as a subcommittee, as finance, admin, and police subcommittee, you're comfortable with making a recommendation to council. Ultimately, if we go to council, it would be to initiate this effort, which would again start with performing, retaining Bartel, performing that
Right.
actuarial study.
Is it by the end of the year, before the end of the year?
That timeline is included. So part of it's going to be dependent on how long it takes to for Bartel to perform their work and help inform this process. Then from then on, it would be engaging council with the necessary resolutions. So we could come back, we can look at the timeline, kind of spell that out a little bit. That's what was presented in the slide with the overview. So I think, Mayor and Chair, what you're kind of driving at is what's the timing risk here? And I think the timing risk is kind of the unknown. It's really about the interest rate environment that we're in right now. We're kind of at a historic low. And one could argue, well, it's likely to go up over time, but you could likewise, it's an unknown. It could technically go down. And the real advantage is, of course, the difference in what we pay at CalPERS versus current interest rates if we were to finance bonds on the market. So, kind of the risk and timing is just where's the interest rate going to go, and what is the potential savings? And that's kind of the unknown. But we have
But according to this numbers, we would save around $3 million.
Well, that depends on, again, the scenario that we pursue. If we're more aggressive in paying it off, we might save more. So those are kind of the scenarios that we would want to pursue. And there's pros and cons with each of those scenarios. So we may save more, but there may be some other cons that we're concerned about. And again, the other aspect to this is that we're relying upon the ad valorem tax to pay our pension obligations, which is a very secure tax, assuming our taxpayers continue to support it. But that's kind of what's underlying this. The other real, what they've identified as a real significant impact is that CalPERS is very likely to change the discount rate and lower it, which in effect is going to increase our financial obligations to CalPERS. And so therefore that's where you get kind of a decreased savings amount because those payments are going to more than likely, our annual payments are more than likely going to go up. So that's kind of the impact of when they lower the discount rate, your payments, all city payments will increase. And so that's part of what you're also hedging here is we would lock in fixed rates, and we know what those fixed rates are and what the term of those bonds are, rather than being, I mean, we're still gonna be at the obligation first, we're members, but, we're trying to, address the impact of that what we really see is a highly likelihood of them decreasing the discount rate. And that's what I think Mike was really kind of, his analysis is pointing out, is kind of building that into the model, just making that as an assumption. They're gonna lower it, so, we're gonna have a little bit less savings because of that.
And, so right now we're paying 7%.
I think that's current.
Yes.
And, in the presentation, it just goes down half a point, right? 6.5. So,
Which is very significant.
which is very,
Based on the
amount.
total amount that we owe in our unfunded accrued liability.
Yes. Okay, I think we do need to, review this a little bit more, because I would like to see what other obligations are due to the city, during those years. But I'm very much, inclined to think that this would be a good thing to do. I think we did have, this process not long ago, where we had another bond.
Well, very, very similar process,
Yeah.
in terms of, just the process that we go through for bond issuance, but that was for, refunding our existing bonds.
Okay,
This would be
A
a
specific
new,
one.
a new bond obligation,
yeah,
that would provide the necessary revenue for us to make our payments. We'd be paying bondholders,
mhm.
in lieu of paying, first.
Yeah, I definitely would like to review what are the obligations of the city in that time frame to see if it's something that's definitely, yes, yes.
Like, I had a question, since CalPERS gets all their money all up front, I mean, I can't, there's no, what's the consideration for, on CalPERS' part, since they get their money right away, as opposed to waiting over the course of many years?
Yeah, pension obligation bond, that money goes right to CalPERS. It goes, I think we would wire it directly to CalPERS. And so then, under our methodology, you'd be 100% funded if we did what we're showing you in this presentation.
I'm just getting at, they don't give you a break because they're getting all their money right up front.
No, they give you a break annually, right? When you pay lump sum in July. I think they give you a break if you pay up front in July.
Right.
For your fiscal year.
We do that. Well,
Yeah.
My thought for subcommittee would be, I think maybe our kind of closest example that Mike spoke about today was Lakeport. They're kind of in the same kind of ballpark, if you will, from the amount of bonds that they were issued. We might be able to kind of get a sense of how their issuance went with pension obligation bonds, just to build that comfort level and see if it's something that based on their experience, kind of gives us a better level of understanding of what they're seeing now that they've issued the bonds, savings and how they went through that process. That's something for consideration. I think that would be beneficial.
Well, yeah, again, going back to what I'm thinking, there's a lot of information. I'd like to kind of keep it focused on Cloverdale. I'd like to keep it, assumptions can go either way. I'd like to kind of get a little bit more direct. If we do this, this is what we see. And so it's a little clearer to me. And if we don't, this is the way it looks for CalPERS. Something we can kind of say, yes, that makes sense. I feel good. Because assumptions, we always assume things, but if it doesn't go that way, we may be losing. And so I'm a little leery of that word, though I know we can't be, until it's done, it's not going to be done. But we do have some information. There's just so much information, I'm not real clear which direction we're going. And so I need to be comfortable on what we're saying, yes.
And in this presentation somewhere I read the amount of money that would be beneficial to our constituents. Could you remind me of that? Based on this study, could you remind me what would be the savings to the constituents? Like, I did read this.
Yeah, it's on page 8 of your packet.
Okay.
There's an estimate that was provided that the city could achieve approximately 3.48 million in debt service savings by leveling the annual debt service of $1 million. So again,
That's
that
right, in summary, right.
Right.
So refinancing debt service could be passed on to city taxpayers in the form of reduced annual pension tax override tax. Right?
right, and that's there's the three scenarios that Mike outlined, and I think that was the one that generated, if I recall, Mike, the most savings for taxpayers.
Yes, that had the highest savings. Yeah, you're paying your debt off, 5 years early, 7 years early.
Right, right.
Okay. So when is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is the first Monday in November.
Mike and Bill, what are your timelines to be effective and productive at the end of the year?
November 1st.
November 1st. And our meeting is what, November?
The 12th or 15th. Council meeting.
Well, the committee, the subcommittee.
Oh, the first Monday in November is November 1st, and the first council meeting will be November 10th.
We could revisit this and then we could bring it to the first meeting.
Well, I would like to suggest that you schedule this as a workshop, a brief one for us, and, Susie could coordinate that. Let's just sit down and kind of take this at a slower pace so we can understand it better, because I think it's important that we move expeditiously, but again, we got to get that comfort level.
So that has to be a special meeting prior to the next scheduled meeting of the council meeting. And it would have to be with all of the council members, or just.
I would suggest it's just a subcommittee.
Just the subcommittee, okay. And it would be with Susie and David. I'm actually going on vacation.
I can coordinate, we can coordinate, Mayor Chair and council member, on a date where we could either schedule a special meeting as a workshop, or we sit down with presentations and discussions with Bill and Mike, so we kind of cover some of the specific questions. We can, I think I think there might be more comfort levels, really looking more closely at the scenarios.
Yes.
And just really getting a better understanding of how those scenarios relate to, specifically to Cloverdale and what it means.
Yes.
That's exactly what
And again, the timelines of other payments due in that foreseeable future by the city.
Okay.
Because we don't want to have to pay everything at once.
So Mike and Bill, I think the direction is that we continue to coordinate with you. I will coordinate on our end with both our chair and vice chair of our subcommittee on some follow-up discussions, so we can get build a better understanding of pension obligation bonds and the different scenarios that are that we may want to consider as part of this bond issuance.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds good. This is Bill. I think that's fine. Certainly acknowledge this is a lot of information. I mean, this is our livelihood. This is what we do day in and day out. And of course, you have other careers and things you do with your lives besides, issuing taxable or tax-exempt bonds. So we certainly get that. And we want you to be totally comfortable with what we're suggesting would be a good thing for the city before this would go to the city council. If we'd like you obviously to be comfortable with recommending it at some point, but we realized, this is all new and maybe a little foreign, but we're happy to take as much time as you need to answer all your questions. And we don't want you to feel unduly pressured into making a decision at all. And so that's part of our job, is to have explain things, maybe make things a little clearer, help educate the decision makers so that you can make the best possible decision. And we're happy to do that. We do that at no cost or obligation. As Mike said, most of us, we only get paid, we're paid contingent on a financing closing, and then out of the cost of issuance. So you can engage us, and we can provide you as much information as you possibly want without costing you any money. The one thing you could do, although you probably want to hold off on this, you could move forward apart from the financing, at least maybe you already have this, David, is get a proposal from Bartell on what their fee would be for a pension tax actuarial study. If the council agrees that has benefit, whether you did the pension bonds or not, theoretically, because it takes 3 or 4 weeks, you could, move forward with that independently of whether you ever did a bond issue. But again, no pressure on that. I just mentioned that to you. So yeah, so we're here. We just want to support the staff and the elected officials, giving them all the information we can. And, we could do it like maybe was suggested, the next finance committee meeting, or I think I can speak for the team. We'd be happy to, provide information at a special subcommittee meeting if that was of interest to the mayor and to the Councilman Paula and the staff.
Yes. And thank you very much, Bill and Mike, James and David. On page 22, in terms of the financing contact list, we have to make some corrections there.
Oh, okay.
Irene is no longer with the city. And then in the city attorney's page, I don't think Stephan is still, is Stephan still?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is okay. But that one, we need to make that correction. Okay, that's it. And again, and I think you have direction, correct, David?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
very
and if there's anything further you'd like us to amplify, staff that wasn't in the presentation, we'd be happy to do that. Or maybe it's as simple as just kind of walking through that again after the subcommittee's had a chance to kind of cut their teeth on the first run. And so, that'd be fine too. So we're here and ready, willing, to able to provide anything else that would support the staff and provide, ultimately the city council information they need to make a good decision for the city.
Yeah, and we can let you go yet because we do need to have any public comments. Do we have any hands?
No hands.
Sure.
No.
I'm just glad that Joe Paula wanted to kind of put a stop on it so you can really take a good look at it, because you really need to see how does it fit with us.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you go to Lake County, then there's a whole different demographic there than you know, so.
And I do want to know what is our obligation deadline.
Yeah.
Throughout the, whatever, still.
I think that's really good that you're taking a look at this stuff. I mean, if you can save money, that's wonderful.
All right, well, I guess, have a good coffee on our name. It's coffee time. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Mike.
All right, very good. So we'll be in touch in terms of a future meeting scheduling, David, as you direct. So, all right, thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much.
Okay, so we're moving on to the American Rescue Plan Funding Matrix. Dave.
Thank you, Mayor Chair. So the item included in your packet under item 5D is an overview of the American Rescue Plan, and included with the overview is a draft of proposed funding matrix, we've tried to capture, some of the input from council on this matrix, but we're really bringing this forward for the subcommittee's recommendations in anticipation of bringing it forward to council. Just as a quick background, especially Susie, but really your whole senior management team have participated in a number of training sessions, either offered through the league, through GFOA, as well as other sources, to look closely at what are the specific categories for a use of American Rescue Plan funds. There's really 6 main categories that are allowed for use of these funds by guidance issued by the Treasury. Those include funding public health expenditures, so things like, for example, our police department is currently providing COVID testing to our police officers. That is an expense for which we did not budget in our budget, because it came after the budget was prepared. So that would be an example of an eligible expense that we could fund with American Rescue Plan funds. But in addition, other costs and expenditures, again, related to supporting public health. So we've had certain expenditures within City Hall for things like disinfection equipment, extra cleaning, things like that. Secondarily, one of the other categories is to address the negative economic impacts caused by the public health emergency. So this is a way to allow local government to fund such things as addressing food insecurity, aid to unemployed workers, loans maybe or grants to small businesses, even rehiring the public sector staff that may have been affected because of they were laid off, and likewise investments in technology infrastructure. One item that we've identified, for example, is funding improvements at CPAC, particularly the AV technology, because of what we've transitioned to now, this quasi-virtual environment, and where we have meetings in person, would like to be able to improve the audiovisual equipment to assist with participating in our council meetings in a healthy way without having to be present. Moving on, serving hard-hit communities and families, these are really kind of where it's kind of specific to certain census tracts where local governments can direct funding to certain qualified individuals.
Could you expand on the census tract that you're talking about?
Yes, this is a provision in the bill that allows local governments to provide specific support. I'm not clear whether we have a qualified census tract in Cloverdale or not. That was where we could specifically allocate American Rescue Plans to certain populations. It tends to be in areas where you may have, for instance, a Native American reservation, so you can provide funding support for them, but the tribal government, but also other households or geographic areas that are disproportionately impacted. So that's an area where we want to research further and determine how we might go about, what are some options for use of American Rescue Plan. So for example, maybe looking at how you fund members of the Latinx population in terms of direct cash funds for members of the Latinx population.
And that would also include, elderly or people who have become ill with COVID and have consequences. I mean, we really need to find out how does this impact Cloverdale, this particular.
Okay. Susie, do you want to take a note of that?
Yep.
And we can certainly look at what are some of the examples that other cities have engaged in where they utilize funding specific to populations within their community. One area where we spent a lot of time on is looking at lost public sector revenue. There was a very specific analysis that was required to determine whether you qualified under this particular provision. And a lot of guidance from the league, a lot of guidance from the Treasury, and a lot of analysis that was required. And unfortunately, we found that we benefited in other revenue areas, particularly in the cannabis, that we were unable to define a loss of revenue within Cloverdale. We did experience a loss in certain categories, most specifically related to our POT tax, but overall, we didn't have a net loss of revenue, where some particularly larger cities did. So we just didn't really qualify for this. What that would enable to do is basically take American Rescue Funds and put it in your general fund. And so we didn't necessarily qualify for that. Now, you can look at this going forward. So it's a continual analysis. So we just look, up to the current period of time. It's not to say something could change, and we might have our show reflect those revenue loss. In this case, again, it also gets back to council's decision if that's what you decide to do. But thus far, based on the analysis, we didn't have strictly meaning within the definition a revenue loss or decline that we could then offset using the fund.
Right. Couldn't just say this was our general fund loss and put their fund directly towards general fund because of that loss. But like David said, it is an ongoing thing. So at the end of each year after the audit, we'll update the number and we can go 3 more years and determine if there was ever, if we have loss at any point. Does it also include grant funds? I mean, there was very little that we thought to not include, except for water. There were a couple of other specific things that we couldn't include from the revenue, but if there's a year where we have less grant funds than we have had previously, then we may qualify.
And again, that's a policy decision for council if you want to utilize our funds to close that gap in the general fund. So we'll always kind of leave that out there that that's an option for council, but right now we don't qualify. The 2 other areas that are provided for in the enabling legislation was premium pay for essential workers. We did identify on the worksheet as council did approve some one-time expenditures, particularly to really all members of the employee groups within the city, but in particular the POA dispatch were offered certain incentives to extend their MOUs. They were kind of the basis for that was the work that they performed during COVID, continuing to provide essential services. And so I think from our perspective, you could offset that pay with American Rescue Plan funds. That is a way that helps kind of support the general fund because it was a general fund expenditure, so we'd kind of be reimbursing the general fund for that expense. That's identified in the worksheet. And then really the last category, which I think where there's probably the most significant interest by council, is to use the funds to invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. We've interpreted the sewer to include drainage. Drainage is often, in many municipalities, kind of is a utility within sewer, if you will, or wastewater, and so kind of fits best within that category. Some of the projects that we've identified within this category include funding drainage improvements at Times Square, but we've also heard from council that there is interest in funding, looking at the capital improvement program and seeing if there are opportunities to fund some of the CIP projects. well, the one that we identified on the worksheet, and again, it's kind of it's a placeholder. We can look at the complete CIP, which we'll be bringing forward to council, that we thought might have the most positive or beneficial impact was our meter replacement program. We've identified the need to replace meters and move to what we call the electronic registers for electronic reading. But it's a multi-year process, and we only get so many done per year. If council decided to strategically utilize these funds for meter replacement, we think we could get it done a lot sooner and a lot more comprehensively. And we think that there's benefit to that, given the drought in particular, but also to what we see in terms of best practices, what cities have done, who've done undertaking these efforts, is to complete the complete meter replacement project in a fairly 1 to 2 year time frame rather than a 5-year time frame that we typically anticipate, which is a cost that borne by the ratepayers, but it would offer a lot of benefits again to our customers because they have new meters. Hopefully, we go to a system where they're all electronic read, and we would be have a system where the data, the use data, is put in the cloud and is accessible by any customer at any time that they still want to access or kind of see where their usage is. So that was that's why we targeted that particular CIP.
Would it reduce the work by employees?
We think there's options for that, and in fact, we think again, if council supported that, we would hire a contractor to assist us with that effort. Because right now, it's usually 1 or 2 staff that are kind of doing it as time permits and amongst their other duties. So, we anticipate that we could hire a contractor that could assist and get that in a much shorter period of time. Because we would need to have that conversation with the contractor that what area of the town we're going to start with, all the logistics, and how long it would take to kind of complete a town-wide metering project. But that's again, that was kind of a placeholder for a CIP project. We thought that staff, we thought, well, that would be the one that we would recommend to council. But we can look at the gamut of the CIP project in the water budget or in the water CIP, and council would say, well, we think this would be the best one. We could outline for council, what are the benefits of each of those projects.
Because, I was also reading here the use of this fund, and it says that it's an infusion of resources to meet pandemic response needs, and to reveal stronger, more equitable economy. So, all these propositions that you are presenting, they all meet the requirements, and we're not going to be violating any standards or requirements by the American Rescue.
What we've done for this packet is really take the language right out of the American Rescue Plan in terms of the 6 funding categories to best reflect well, not even best reflect, to just be as accurate as we can and reflect what the guidance from the Treasury offers or provides. Unfortunately, I think the federal government receives so much feedback on the draft guidance. They haven't finalized the guidance yet. And this is something they were supposed to move very quickly on finalizing it. But I think a lot of the guidance has come in around this whole issue of replace lost public sector revenue. Well, again, because we did the analysis, we found given our specific circumstance, we couldn't meet that criteria. Well, I think a lot of cities were engaged in this process. They commented, and so the Treasury's been trying to come up with what's the exact final guidance on this. So we're doing our best to reflect kind of the broad category when Congress was debating it about funding water and sewer. And so that's a real reflection. And along with that is broadband. And you're seeing that kind of, those initiatives around broadband, because again, the greater societal need of access to information.
And for kids to be able to work.
Right, it's the new economy, so it's a way of investing, I think. Because the bill really started, I think it was March of 2021. So even though the pandemic started in February approximately of 2020, the funding really is supposed to be from that point forward. So, the way I look at it is kind of a strategic tool to invest in your community, address some of the impacts.
So, if I may, Madam Chair, thank you. First of all, this is the first installment. There's a second installment still in the works.
We've received one of the installments. We'll receive the second installment in probably July.
Right. But there is a second one.
There is a second one, but this spreadsheet that we have in here incorporates both installments. Both, yeah.
Well, it
So
doesn't-
that's the total that we have.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'd
No,
like to finish. No, I'm just trying to be.
No,
clear.
I'm just trying to see the numbers.
Yeah, on the report, it doesn't mention the second one that I
Yeah.
saw. That's why I was questioning.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, okay, so that does. The water, I'd like to talk just a minute about water. So I recall a report we talked about at one of our meetings, council meetings, where there's need for infrastructure down at the water plant. And that would seem like something we should actually have on this list as well. I recognize meters are important, but I'd like to be able to evaluate how that rates to the existing problems with our tanks down at the water plant. And I know we talked a little bit about that. So I think that may be something we should at least show on here so we can at least talk about it. Because that's huge. Water is a big deal, as we know. I'm looking at this going back to the black and white, which is with the federal government guidelines. And I want to emphasize, in my mind, the guidelines, we need to look at what's the long-term best use of those funds for Cloverdale. And I look at that mostly by trying to invest in infrastructure that's going to help the city be successful in the years, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We don't get much. When we lost redevelopment, we lost one tool we had to make significant improvements as needed. And now we need to look at this one-time money to see how it could fit into the categories to make long-term improvements. So I'm glad that you do have the Times Square on here, because we're talking about medical services, we're talking about education, and we're talking about a street that really needs to be fixed so students can safely go to school and get around the Citrus Fair area. So, but those are the kinds of projects I really put a high value on, because they're going to be here for the next 50 years. Once the money's spent, we've made significant improvements. So I really want to focus, and that's why the water came to mind. So I remember in the report, it was talking about the need to either add a second tank or do something. And that was seemed to be a high desired need. And I really think we need to look at that, because that had a long-term impact on our, especially with the water situation that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to interject.
And I want to follow this because we thought that we were not sure how much money we have now, how much money we're going to have later. So you're saying that the first payment is for 1,500,000.
1,030,000.
I'm looking at the
Yeah,
table, but I should know.
I didn't quite follow the table.
Yeah, I couldn't have a clear understanding of how much money is here now. And then in relationship to that, can we spend the upcoming money, or we can only start spending what's here now?
Well, that's an area we want to take council direction on, because we know we have in the bank, so to speak, the slightly over $1 million, and we kind of just rounded off just for state numbers, so it's about $1.3 million. The other tranche, which is due in June or July, we, at this particular time, we fully anticipate that money is going to be allocated. And I want to just mention, because you hear a lot of reference in the news about this, is that the city of Cloverdale, along with many cities in Sonoma County, with the exception of Petaluma and Santa Rosa, are what are referred to as non-entitlement cities. As a non-entitlement city, the Treasury allocates funding to the state of California first, and then the state disperses it to the city. So there's a little bit of a timing issue there, for the entitlement cities kind of get their disbursement fairly quickly. It was probably almost another 60 days, I think, approximately, after the state received the allocation for the non-entitlement cities before they cut a check, so to speak, to the city. So it was the effect was the same, but it took us a little bit longer to actually receive the funding for the American Treasury. So it's kind of like the state, if you for lack of a better word, a middleman, a middle person in terms of who we ultimately get our funds to, and that ties into other aspects of reporting down the road, because we'll probably be reporting to the state versus that reporting to the Treasury, like some of the entitlement cities are going to be required, are already required to do reporting. There are the strings attached, so we're fully anticipating the reporting requirements to the state of California, which they'll compile and then have to report up to Treasury.
Okay, so it comes to the state, then state to us, because we're not entitlement city, and then we would report to the state, which would report to the Treasury.
Yeah, and so on that, there has been, at the federal level, there's been ongoing negotiations about a federal infrastructure bill. Those are all kind of those discussions seem to be all over the board. At one time, there was a discussion, or at least it was on the table, possibly scaling back that second tranche and tying that somehow to the infrastructure funding, because as you can see, as we talked about, some of these items are infrastructure. So that's just something council should be apprised of, is that, I don't count it until you receive it, but, doesn't mean you shouldn't plan for it. So that would be my recommendation, plan for it, but don't spend it until we receive it.
Okay, yeah, that's my main concern.
Right.
But I guess we could phase it.
Yes,
We take the highest, because we do have money in the bank, that we could start 1, 2, 3 projects and identify the next 3 projects. And when the money's in the bank, move forward.
Right. And what I would suggest, just in terms of the process, would be, ultimately identify what you'd like to see the money spent on. Staff can then come back with, a plan that council can review about, how we might fund that through American, how, depending on, again, on the timing. The thing about I think your focus should be kind of big picture. What are the things you think you want to allocate money to? And we'll kind of figure out logistically how it might work and present that to council. But have that in your back of your mind.
Well, I'm, Councilman Powell and I are very much into the infrastructure concern.
Yeah.
And equally, I am concerned about broadband because of the experience that teachers and children and businesses have had during COVID. And we need to be able to continue working, even if we have a pandemic. The same thing with police departments. We all need to have access to quick internet, Wi-Fi services. We cannot, be indifferent to what the emotional and psychological impact has been on children at this point. And basically because we have had very weak access to internet and to broadband, for the community at large. So we want to have successful students, we want to have successful businesses, we want to make sure that the police can take care of all the safety needs of the community, as well as all of us stay informed and connected with the greater region. So that is, to me, that is definitely part of infrastructure.
Absolutely. And
So we can't sacrifice, this educational aspect, which is broadband.
right.
And water, sewer, definitely.
And Mayor, just to point out, we did include an expenditure under broadband. So actually pre-COVID, we were working on obtaining a proposal for extension of fiber to city facilities, including City Hall, Police Department, and the courtyard. The courtyard is really for internet. And there's some things that we'd like to accomplish out there that we can't do because of poor internet service, and that's things now, all the technology.
Technology.
Security, for
water, and
example,
so on.
it requires better broadband. So I just want to point that out, that what we included in this worksheet was a cost estimate we obtained for broadband services. And really, the big cost is the extension of that fiber into city facilities. And the way the service provider was going to do it was amortize that cost over a number of years, so we didn't have to front the capital and pay for it over time, which was still pretty expensive as compared to our existing internet service provider. So what we've shown in the worksheet is cost to extend fiber to those locations. We did, when we were working on it, receiver, because we brought this to the finance and the subcommittee at the time, and the subcommittee member, current council member Peggy, was recommended we also look at extending fiber to the EOC, and the cost doesn't include that. And the only reason was because we didn't, because we were in the process of doing that when COVID hit, so we kind of put that on the back burner, but we wanted to bring this forward because of, specifically these funds could be used.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on the state bill that signed that talks about broadband? Wasn't there was a statewide effort to get broadband funding was allotted for that? So, I mean, I want to be real cautious not to get in front of it. If there's money out there to do the broadband, which I agree with our Mayor Cruz, that we need it, but I want to make sure if there's an alternate funding that we don't use this one-time money to do that we get. And so do we know where that's at?
Well, the legislation, I mean, council supported it, it passed. What my interpretation of the legislation was that they were going to make it easier for cities to apply for grant funding for that purposes.
And we would be able to have match money if needed.
Right, but I don't know, from Paul, whether, that means they guaranteed allotment or guaranteed allocation. I'm sure it's very competitive, but.
And we don't know the timeline.
I don't, but that's an area we can certainly research.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable, if we had a little bit more information, because we could also contact our legislators as well to see, because we do have that need, there's no question. I just really think if there's an alternate funding, we really want to make sure we explore that.
Yeah, and that we don't get access to because we already did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
concerned about.
But if we could get started, something, hoping that we will go ahead and get further from this new legislation. But since it's so recent, I don't foresee that it will be coming anytime soon. We're still in pandemic. We don't know.
My thoughts would be to maybe have money in reserve sitting there where we could move forward if it didn't materialize, but not necessarily start the project until we go through that grant application. And, just really try to get funding in an alternate source, because it's one-time funding as well.
My concern about that, Councilmember Sala, is that we're not out of pandemic. we don't know what's gonna happen about this yet. So it's kind of a result of COVID and the ongoing situation with COVID, so. But we're definitely, you know, inclined towards infrastructure. We definitely would like to review the CIP. You know, projects that are there, what are the timelines, so that we could use some of this money. And I know that for upgrading the water and sewer plant, we're definitely gonna need much more access to internet, broadband, and so on. So it's kind of it is a double project, and same with the police department.
That's why I think just trying to figure out where they're at with
Yeah.
that bill and funding, it looks like it's a long ways down the road.
And you know, our division capital, that will give us an update in no time,
Sure.
because that's
So,
her bread, daily bread.
yeah.
So, that's why it's so good to be able to work with our division, you know, there's so resources,
Yeah.
so.
So where do we go from here on this, David? I'd like to see, I really like to get this, storm drain installation at the Times Square on the, because this is moving as we talk. As you know, the school district is moving, they're doing their build out. We have Alexander Valley, who's closing on the property. They want to do that. I mean, this is on the horizon. It's kind of time sensitive. I'd like to get this thing kind of out there, get that done, at least the funding, get that done, and then, because I don't want anything that's going to jeopardize their ability to build, you know, the medical center.
Right, and what our goal today was to present and provide kind of a matrix that identifies funding categories that fit within the guidance for this subcommittee. We were thinking, if you're prepared, we'll bring it forward for discussion for council at your next meeting. We have a placeholder on this agenda, where we kind of package this up council consideration at your next meeting next Wednesday. And what we can do, reflecting the comments today, what we've identified on this worksheet is, you know, 850,000 for water projects, which we were suggesting meters, but it could be any project.
But, you know, underwater, you need to give us all the
Examples.
other projects.
Right, we could include the water.
And look at the, capital improvement project list that you already have,
Sure.
and see what would take priority,
Mhm.
if anything.
We could list
Yes.
3
That
to
would
5
be
projects
essential.
for council to consider, or just include the whole water CAP, and that way council can kind of look at them and.
Well, we need to see the whole picture, but we need to narrow it down to something doable, especially within the amount of money that we have, which is not so much. But
Yeah.
something we could get started on.
Yeah, that's the important thing to remember is that,
Yes.
well, $2 million is a lot of money. What can you actually start and finish without bringing in more money that we weren't anticipating? Which is kind of why we, at least in my opinion, chose the water meters. I totally agree that maybe wells are better, maybe even at a different route we could go, as long as we can stay within that dollar
Within the
amount.
budget.
But the water meter, they benefit staff because right now we're going and reading each one and writing, you know, typing in the number into the iPad. This way it would be a radio read, and then also it would benefit the budget because every year we budget $100,000 towards this project. So while we would be removing $100,000, something else.
And free personnel.
Yeah.
But with that said, as a member of the community, I'm looking at having adequate resources as well.
Oh, I
Back to the well, the tanks, as much as I'm all for saving money, I also want to have the things needed to have a quality life for the residents. So,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, no, it's all, there's always more needs than we have money.
And the issue of the well is very. Okay, so, you have no direction, is there anything else?
I just want to make sure, if you could, when you bring it to council for the, you know, kind of talk, that we do know a little more about the state, broadband.
Broadband.
Yeah, just- yeah,
Legislation.
and what the anticipated process will be and how that's all going to work.
And And also, where does this, Alexander Valley Health, street drainage falls within the parameters of the prior budget? And if it's not there, where would it be inserted?
We can do that. We'll, and just make sure we're tracking with the subcommittee, on this spreadsheet. And I realize it's a little bit of an eye test here.
That's why I have a computer bigger.
I'm gonna speak highly of eating your kale. This is good for your eyesight. But we did identify the one-time bonuses, and then we, from staff's perspective, again,
You guys.
you don't have to allocate the American Rescue Plan to cover that expense. We put it there because it was an expense that we incurred. It would help the general fund by backfilling that cost that we've incurred for that. And we believe it's an eligible expense. We didn't feel like there was a qualification for the public sector revenue. We did have expenses related to City Hall. We've also identified our funding agreement with the chamber and the senior center. Those are budgets of amounts that we, again, are proposing, well, not proposed, the budget identified use of general fund revenue. And a lot of the work that they're doing and had done during the pandemic was related to improving our economic conditions. There's still that discussion out there with the senior center. The council did allocate $15,000 in the budget, but there was a conversation that they were interested in they asked, their request was for 25. But I think council was wanted to have more information about their request. And a lot of the work that they've been doing is particularly around food insecurity. And so some of that funding could be used some of the American Rescue Plan could be used legitimately for offsetting the cost of that agreement. Then we have the broadband, the sewer, which is really the storm drain work, which we identified as Times Square, the water CIP, we've got COVID supplies, employee COVID testing. We did input, in the budget, we have $10,000 allocated to address expenses for related to homeless services. And again, recognizing that there's been a tremendous work during the pandemic around trying to address the needs of homeless. We have an agreement, well, we funded an agreement last year, and it'll be in this year's budget for the Citrus Fair and supporting their effort to be prepared in case of a local emergency where we need to call Care and Shelter Branch to operate during that emergency. So it could be related to COVID or a fire emergency or you name the emergency, but there was some funding that we did provide to them to kind of get their operations ready to go and make sure they have all the necessary supply and signage in case of an emergency. We do have on the list the audio visual upgrade. I got a quote to improve the AV system and put in a fixed camera system, which is similar to what some other city council chambers have. Field, for example, Miserable have fixed cameras. You just need an AV operator at CPAC. And I think that there's some real benefit to that. Again, it can facilitate remote access, especially during COVID. And what we are faced with the retirement of our existing AV operator. He's retiring at the end of December. So it'd be ideal, he has to do a lot of camera setup, and we pay him for that. This would provide that equipment, and then it would be being a student or somebody that can just utilize the camera equipment, and we think offers benefits to the gave me this is related to COVID testing. And last but not least, council has funded the utility bill relief program. We did identify it that year. If council wants to backfill that expense, it currently comes through the general fund pays for it, and it helps control the customers. So those are just kind of an overview of some of the proposed expenditures.
And could you give us an update on what is the use of the utility bill relief when you bring it to council? You know, when you bring this, could you give us an update on
Sure.
what are the numbers, how many people, what do you foresee the need to be, and so on?
And we're concurrently, our finance team has been working on a new state program that looks like it's going to offer us the ability to address some of the what we'll call arrearages. So during this period of time with COVID, the state stepped in and said we cannot turn off anybody's water, and that was the tool often we used to procure payment. And so some customers' bills have, you know, increased substantially and been prolonged. We have no ability to shut them off, and so the state has developed this program to offer communities some reimbursement that is so long as it goes to those accounts that are kind of past due the state. When council established that program, it was previous to that whole discussion. It was meant to provide some utility relief.
How money are the state providing?
So the state will provide funds for anyone who became delinquent as of March 2020 and is still delinquent. So we have.
Do they have a limit of money on that, or?
They did not state a limit. They did ask how many were more than $600. Because they would require a 1099 to use the funds to offset their tax invoices. But we have about $40,000 that came in between those times that we could use. We haven't received the funds, but that's what we reported to the state, and now we're waiting.
All right.
So the other thing, if I interject on the audiovisual, I know we passed the tech funding plan, and there's monies that come in for that. And I don't know how that fits into this, because that's a specific fund for this service. And that fund, it would seem to me, should fund this project, not necessarily.
Yeah, I think the issue with the tech fund, you're absolutely right, Councilmember Hood, was just there wasn't adequate funds to pay for the full cost of the
Yeah, so I'd like to just, when you bring it back, I'd like to just see the breakdown on how that works. Is this something we can loan and pay ourselves back through the tech funding versus just outright buying? Yeah, because the tech funding, it's a restricted fund, has to go for this type of service, so.
And if it's under what was required because of COVID, then that would be the part that we would want to use, you know, like our balance.
I mean, the majority of the tech funds of what we collect are utilized on an ongoing basis to pay for the service that we currently employ. You know, we're basically leasing the equipment through the contractor that's setting it up. But we can touch on that when we're recording that. So we have that's part of the consideration for council.
Okay. Are there any hands in the public?
No hands in the public.
Sherry, you are public hands. Okay. Thank you. So let's move on. It's already 3:25. City newsletter, the Cloverdale Connect publication. We need to come to a decision on this because we want to start promoting communication, access, etc. I see in the package here, the different layouts. What exactly you want us to talk about here?
Thank you,
Half
Madam
a
Chair.
page,
Right, we understand that there's definitely interest, by council in proceeding with, utilizing Clover Connect as a tool to help communicate to the community. They mail their publication once a month to every household in Cloverdale, the surrounding incorporated areas, well, Geyserville. What's included in your packet is some different options for us to consider. From anywhere from a full page ad to a half page to even less. But I think kind of where we were focusing was maybe more on the half page concept. And then within that concept there are some different options, whether you do half page vertical or half page horizontal, and kind of some layouts that Dana from the Cloverdale Connect provided. These are just to get samples, so that they don't have to follow this format. But I kind of liked it. It was identifying kind of opportunity for 3 separate stories based on department or could be topics. So any of these could be combined into one large story, but I think here it reflects that there would be kind of like three categories of discussion items or newsletter items. That doesn't necessarily need to be discussed today, but really was just getting this council or the committee's recommendation on whether you support the half page concept or full page, and just the general layout. I think there's also a discussion around whether we look to engage through this effort in doing both in English and Spanish, and if so, do we still go with the half page, or do we do kind of half Spanish, half English, or do we go with the half page and kind of focus it to half English, half Spanish at the half page level, and then ultimately bring this to council, because this was not an item that we included in the budget. This was a budget adjustment, so we want to reflect the cost and the proposed recommendation for the layout to council and give support.
I don't understand the pricing because, it's all 5 seats. It's like layout is item 5 seats. The other one, item 5 seats. Item 5 seats. So, and where do they fit within this dimension that are here?
Yeah, 5C is just reference to the agenda packet itself. 5C, but so I think the different examples were a full page, where you're gonna have a lot more words, if you will, and then half page, both horizontal and vertical. So those were kind of the 3 examples that were included. And again, these are just proposed layouts. I think Dana has shown incredible flexibility in how we might, best lay out a newsletter item for the Cloverdale Connect newsletter.
And this is with the discount?
So she's shown us her standard rate. Dana did share with me that she would discount those rates slightly based on us being a city, a nonprofit organization. But she also echoed the perspective that she doesn't make a lot of money in this, and that the costs are just part of a reflection of putting the material and in the newsletter, and ultimately there is a cost for mailing. So but these are standard rates. She did offer a kind of a discounted rate. I didn't want to.
Yeah. no, we understand that. We need to have real numbers.
Right,
to make
right.
a decision.
when it comes, but I think
Yeah.
really, I would support, if we're gonna do it, which we should, in English and Spanish, we're gonna need the full page, because that's really a half a page. It's gonna be, if we go to a half page, we're really only gonna have just a paragraph from each of the departments. It's really not gonna give you the opportunity. What I envision is getting good information out to the community, so they can read it, be aware of what's going on, be aware of the issues, and why certain things are happening, why certain things are taking longer than we anticipated, and trying to open that communication. So I would say, maybe, I'd like you to come back, when it comes to the full council, with the full page, what it's gonna cost, and how long are we locked into it? If we find that that's too much space, can we reduce it, or are we locking it for a year or 6 months? It would seem like half a page, when we have the city manager's office, police department, the planner, the finances, water, there's so much going on, so much we want to try to get out there. And I realize you're not going to be able to say a lot, but you can just plant the key thing with reference where to get more information, because half a page isn't going to allow a lot of space to get into some details. But at least the person can read it and know how to get more information.
And, I envision that for community information, what we should have is touch upon those situations that we need to highlight at the moment. Either it is, speeding or not stopping, or, not complying with ADA requirements in our city streets or our sidewalks, issues of transportation. She does put a lot of announcements on what's going on in the city. Like in this month, she put everything about the zero waste, which is great, because that's something that we wouldn't have to pay, But at the same time, the letters, the font is so big. Could you find out if there could be smaller font? Because it is very big font. And if people have problems reading, my father always had a magnified one. I have it at home. I love it, because I remember him reading the paper. That was so small, and this is a very big font. That if that's something that she could take into account. But yeah, on community information, I would like to, have ordinances in English and Spanish. I mean, I don't know what you would say. Also, some issues that are pending or that have been selling in the last month, so that people know how it was resolved, and what is the process for resolving it. And so at this point, if I may open to the public, is there anybody hands up?
No hands electronically.
I agree with the discussion. It should be, I like to see it be informative. Instead of announcing meetings, I like to see information and issues that come up, and, you can't cover everything, obviously, half a page, but you can take your priorities and just say, we have an issue with the water, with the drought, this is what we're looking at, this is what we're planning, or this is what's happening. Just kind of like a little cleaner of faults, and, not too worried, but at least, we know what's going on right now.
And we also want to use this to invite people to submit concerns and questions to all of us. So that when we provide the information to the chief or to David or Kevin with community information, that we could, come together and say, oh yeah, this happened, and this is how we're responding, and so on. So, and of course, it's all a trial, so maybe if you say for a page, Councilmember Powell, maybe we should go for 6 months and see how that goes. And see if she's amenable to that. And perhaps if it's too much, then we could find ways of maybe putting to 3/4 or half a page. And, and just go and see how people respond to it. We would welcome somehow to measure what is the effectiveness of this tool. It's important that we also have a feedback on what is people's response, because we could be doing things thinking that this is what people want, and at the end, it's, we would have wasted a lot of money because, it doesn't make it,
Well, I just think it's important, like,
Oh, it is.
you and I hear things out there as well as city staff. If one person's saying something, other people are hearing it. It's important. For instance, you hear of a speeding vehicle certain times in certain areas, and the complaints, and the chief in his place, we're getting complaints about this, we're gonna be monitoring this area. Caution, make sure parents know that, especially if it involves school kids, talk to your drivers, slow it down, we're gonna be paying attention. Getting the word out, that's what I see this being a very helpful tool about different things.
factual.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, add to what Joe was saying is that, it's really good to put the information out there, because with the social media, this stuff is like a ping pong ball walking off the walls and the ceiling and everything, it's just craziness. So when all this comes up, like with the speeding vehicles and everything, to put something in there that says, we are addressing this, this is what we're doing, whatever.
We're
It's
listening
like,
to you.
okay, something is being done.
We'll know it.
Yes, no, it's infinitely important, and this is the situation that all cities struggle with, how to communicate with the constituents. We're trying everything that we can.
It's better to try than not at all.
Yeah, I think we could, we could spend a lot of time kind of pre-programming one of the topics, but maybe that's a, an item for the
Down the road.
subcommittee, that, given the date of the subcommittee, that would give us time to prepare for the newsletter, issued, that, for example, for November, we could be planning, or October, newsletter, since December just came out, we could be planning the topics that we think are most pertinent at the subcommittee, and prepare those for publication.
So direction is 1 page, see if we can hire for 6 months, the bilingual.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
And
my understanding
we
is,
would like to know the number.
okay, so I think my understanding is, it's not really a contractual obligation for us, it's really about just making sure we have adequate budget to cover the cost. And so, we would plan for a full page to the end of the year. If we go to half a page ad, well, we've got adequate funding in place to cover it. But yet we'll incur less cost. So, that way we're kind of covered for the possibility of a full page ad through, say from November to June, so 7 months.
Good.
What we'll do, we'll package this up and bring it to council. We'll see if we can bring it next one, if not the following one, for council support, the full page, and request we'll finalize the process through Dana and Cloverdale Connect, and we'll bring it forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments, Chief, or, okay?
Been looking forward to writing articles.
I think we all will.
I do whatever it is.
I think we all will, okay? Okay, so let's move on then to council team building scope of work. I thought that we were gonna have at least 2 vendors to consider.
Well, I did follow up with another city that obtained a quote from a competing firm. And I'm happy to do that. When we engage in that effort, it starts to get, well, let me speak to this. To bring this forward, it does require a amount of time having a conversation with folks that are qualified to provide kind of the team building in terms of their background, what are the expectations, what are some of the key issues. So to be able to prepare this proposal, I did spend some time with Talia in discussing it so, I mean, that was one of the questions, is, council, you want me to, you want me to spend all that time and give council more options? I'm happy to do that, but I did want to bring this forward because I had, really taken the time to develop this proposal with Talia. So I'm open to that, Mayor, if you'd like me to kind of establish that working relationship with another.
Well, now that you have a thorough proposal, you could say, okay, and please help me with this one, approach another company and say, okay, these are the expectations that we would have, and these are the timelines that we would need, the number of hours, and blah, blah. And that without necessarily revealing the whole thing. And say, what is your charge for this type of service? Because if that's what they do, that's their daily bread, they should have some quotes for this type of service. Would you like another vendor?
Well, this thing's been dragging on for a while, and I'd like to get it in place. I think it's important. Ideally, I think getting 3 bids would be important, but with that said, I know, is this the one the county's used? It's a team member from one that Sonoma County's used.
It was, because I recall that the county administrative office with the board of supervisors utilized the associate with practice that they really liked and seemed to have a lot of success with, and that was part of the driving factor in working with practice. And this was the only one that maybe from a differentiator with the other companies that looked at, they were all kind of more either California based, but they weren't Sonoma County based, and that was kind of one of the key aspects was I thought there would be a lot of value in having local Sonoma County based consultant for things which always come into effect with travel costs, being able to connect with council members on a one-on-one basis. It just seems to work better when you have someone locally. But again, I'm happy that with these kinds of in my experience with team building exercises with consultants, you develop a very close relationship and trying to have a conversation around what's the goals of it, and it's a little different than just your typical kind of getting competitive quotes. And so that's the reason why normally you go out with an RFP, it's kind of you get a more maybe generic response, and so it's challenging to have that relationship with multiple consultants because they all seem to think they're going to be the ones who are going to you're going to offer them the job at the end of the day. So, but I'm happy to do that. It does take more time. It's time to kind of be able to put this together. So that's the reflection.
Was this one of the people that our division recommended also?
I think I don't recall seeing this on Sarah's list. The practice again, I did do a review of their qualifications, and they had Sonoma County, but they also had a number of other cities in Sonoma County. So it just seems to be that local knowledge.
Well, I definitely agree. Having somebody based in Sonoma County, I think through a lot of team building and use local team building facilitators when they're available. You can get together with them more frequently. It's definitely a higher cost typically when they're out of the area because there is per diem, there's going to be expenses that they're going to add to the cost of the work for obvious reasons. They're going to want to be reimbursed for their But I did send some comments to you, David, and I don't see some of those. I don't see them in here at all. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. You did get my email, I think.
I did, and I shared that perspective with Talia, and I was happy to revisit that with her. I think
They just got to understand, I'm not kind of like just asking, I really want that to take place. That's not like, if it works, I really think, and I tried to articulate my thoughts, and I'm only speaking for myself. The council doesn't want to have the same value on the city attorney. We want them to both be part of that from day one. And so I feel fairly strong about that. And I mean,
Actually, we did discuss this and I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think just to be clear, what we're talking about is the assumption. And that's where the language was about having the city attorney involved, was under the assumption. I think the scope did reflect the comments, because you go out to follow a workshop, the recommendations plan. And that to me was the key difference. And again, I was not clear about what the role of the city attorney was in terms of participating in a team building workshop. So that's on me. What I'm hearing Councilmember always saying is you want the city attorney to be integral to this process. I didn't see it as a performance review process, but maybe that's part of it. So
well, I'm not sure what performance
It's
review
not a
is.
performance review.
No, this is a plan for team building. He's
Sure.
part of our team. He's a valuable part of our team. And I want him to be involved just like you're involved. And like we're going to all be involved, and the senior staff's going to be involved. The city attorney is part of our team. He works for us as part of that team. We want to make sure anything that he has concerns with, or anything that we have concerns. And when I say concerns, it's not performance, it's more operational, that we're trying to kind of get us all together, that he needs to be a key part of that. So I wish you would have reached out to me and chatted a little bit about it. I was a little bit surprised that I didn't see that there, but I want him to be involved in the initial conversation and help plan it with you, collaboration between all of us. Because that at the end of the day, when it's all over, we're all on the same page, including.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
and especially because we need to make sure that this leads into making sure that our manual reflects what are the things that the city attorney and the city manager need to guide us on as newcomers to council.
Right.
And it was a very daring time to, for me to come to council without any true guidelines and a manual that was dated, and without the cohesion among the team members to say, this is how it's done, Martha, or this is what you need to request, and so on. So, we're going to continue to have new council members, and they need to come and be able to hit the ground running. So we need to make sure that we have the resources to make sure we are very functional and equally informed. That's my concern, and I think it's yours too.
Yeah, and I'll go back and make sure Jose is integrated into the assumptions. And just so council is aware, I was expecting the whole team and so it's going to be part of it. So, I mean, maybe it
That's
should
all I'd
be.
expected too.
Oh, absolutely. And so I think, usually there's a point person, and I think your comment, Councilmember, was to make sure that both Jose and I are both joint spokespersons. And that's an unusual role for a facilitator to play, but I'm happy to tell her and let her know that, Jose will also be kind of a key, whether the point person will be point people.
Just so I want to be real clear, what I see is you both be working together. It's not like him and then you and then him.
Sure.
It'd be like the three of us sitting here working out our agenda, discussing what we're trying to get to and how it's going to go. It'd be collaboration between them. That's what I do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I collaborate, just like, we were on senior staff this morning, all of us together. So I hope my team thinks I'm highly collaborative because I try to be. So the assumptions weren't intended to reflect that we're not going to work together. It was just a function of who does the consultant identify as the point person. So in this case, if I identify Jose, she can go talk to Jose separately with me, and that's perfectly fine. Well,
I'm happy to talk to you more on it. if you
Yeah.
have any questions.
I think Councilmember was really trying to reflect into the scope of work. So, and I think your comments were really great, and I reflected that back.
And then, do we have anybody in the public to make any comments about this?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the last item. We have many other things, but some things that will take some time. Alternatives for proactive code enforcement.
Actually, well, I mean, Kevin, I'll just start and then you can double click and think a lot. What we wanted to achieve with this item is give the subcommittee some additional information about options. So what we've done is that Kevin's worked with Orly to obtain a proposal for providing consulting services for Orly. This is a company that does a lot of code enforcement services throughout the state of California, and our city attorney did recommend that, this is one of the firms he worked with, and so that they're very well qualified by code enforcement services. But in addition to that, we also included in the packet, just for further reference, a cost estimate for hiring either a code enforcement officer or a community services officer. So they're kind of just for comparison contract perspective, there's an opportunity to look at whether we is one of the alternatives is contract. Another alternative would be to budget and hire a full-time either code enforcement officer or community services officer to provide code enforcement services for the city. So we want to be able to present those two alternatives for this subcommittee's recommendation, ultimately with the thought of bringing this back to council for further consideration. Another option would be to kind of look at revamping our internal processes to better reflect council's goals. So that was the goal of those two items. And then Kevin can speak to you, I think.
Yeah, I did speak to, had a kind of an interview with Orly, and just kind of describe what we were going through. We needed someone to take it from the beginning all the way to the end, including court proceedings, if it ever gets to that point in these cases, and they were very familiar with that process. What's reflected here is it's about $50,000, and that would be one day, about 8 hours a week for a code enforcement officer. They supply their own vehicle, and a code enforcement project manager. This, again, you kind of covered it, but this might be an intermittent step that we could take to get some more code enforcement. Fel does just that on getting all these code enforcement under control. But we got a lot of work like the rest of us, so I think additional help would be well received. So that, I mean, we could ask Orly to increase the number of hours if we thought that was appropriate. But they're open to pretty much anything that we want. And I think I described what was going on in town in terms of what our general code enforcement issues were for fellows in that meeting as well. So that's kind of the end of my report.
Do you have a list of specific actions that you need for Cloverdale?
Well, this, I mean, we couched this like an active code enforcement. So my vision would be for this person, if we went down this road, was to immediately try some of our current cases, have them take those over, and then, if they see egregious cases in the community, alert us to those and start the process. I mean, that's really what an active code enforcement is when you're out looking. Oh, by the way, they do also building, they're very familiar with building code violations as well as planning. So they seem very knowledgeable in code enforcement. But again, Mayor, that would be my take would be that they would immediately take over the current ones, give them an update on what they are, and then we can apprise them of new cases, or if there's any particular thing that we're looking for, like the basketball courts or rundown buildings, things like that. Give them the direction to start looking for those.
How would that integrate with what I hired and what the reset? Wait, what is it? How do you see it all merging?
What I would see is them taking it over and letting Raphael handle planning issues. And I think personally, I think 8 hours a week would be a good start. We could at least see how that goes. But what I would see is Raphael working with them to, again, get them up to speed, but then hopefully with their experience and knowledge, they would take over the entire process. You know, report to us weekly or bi-weekly.
And what about Coastline? Because they do something too.
Yeah, they mostly do building violations. So if someone's building without a permit and our terrorists private that, I think that would continue. You know,
Because I see like different kinds of code enforcement. You know, I see Teresa with the police department, I see Rafael with, you know, constituent-driven complaints. Then I also see Coastline doing some construction, and then we're bringing somebody else on board. And I need to have a clear picture, and I think, I don't know how you see that.
Well, it's definitely, they're well qualified. You know, I read through the packet, they're well qualified. My concern is 8 hours a week. It seems a little bit light. It seems like it's going to be more reactive. We're going to try to find them. If we get a complaint, send it to them. They're not going to be out looking on their own. It's going to just be more of a what we got, but doing a total job. You know, for $50,000, and I'm looking at the cost of a full-time, like a community service at 133 with benefits. But that does incorporate PERS, right? And PERS is funded under a different, so it's not a general fund expenditure. It's coming out of the ad valorem tax. But with that said, we're with a full time, we'd have 1,664 more hours a year because a full time employee works 2,080 hours a year versus in this case 416 hours a year. I agree with you. You know, it's a good start, but my concern is, you know, a proactive. And again, I don't mean aggressive when I say proactive. I mean getting compliance. But proactive is finding it, taking action. You know, we have 3 different chapters that I wrote down, you know, in our municipal code: nuisance abatement, weed abatement, cannabis. All 3 of those, and cannabis being a big one. That we have both dispensaries as well as deliveries, and there's nobody doing the backgrounds, checking out their credentials. There's nobody really going there making sure, well, to a degree, how many walkthroughs do they make? How many are paying attention? I know the police do some of that. It's in the code, but it really, you know, objective with the cannabis tax was to have a full-time code enforcement that would pay attention to those on a regular basis. So I think it's a good step, but I don't want to lose sight of what we should be really having it in-house. Get the full 2,080 hours working code enforcement in all sectors. So that's just how I feel. It seems like you know, it's a lot. I get it, they're trained, but we also, when you hire one, you can train them. They have the different schools available, and that's what these individuals have been through, the schools, and they're certified. But those schools are available if we hire an in-house to send them as well. They're usually a week school. There's 3 of them, 3 different levels, and 832 school. So they're available. So I think having an in-house person that we have more hours, better control to direct, and you know, once they're trained, they can do everything that individuals can do.
Just clarification, we do hire HDL, which Lieutenant Parker and I and their code enforcement have done 2 inspections annually of all of that. Just so you know, and
that's important. I'm thinking more of random walkthroughs and random just, you know, seeing who's going in, what's going on, the things that you do, you don't know minors. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting any of that taking place, but that's what the code enforcement, make sure that they have it properly secure, just random checks, and that's because they're here and they do that. and that is in our ordinance. We made sure that was when it was written, that they would be doing this. So it's just important. And again, I get back to the weed abatement. The fire district does a great job, but they're also, we don't, as a city, have the control over them. They do them when it works with their schedule, and we had it earlier than normal fire season, and trying to get weed abatement letters out took a lot longer than I think it could have if we had an in-house process, because there are codes that we should be enforcing these. But that's just my opinion on it. I like the fact that we're getting something, so I can support it, but I really think it'd be more cost effective to go with a full-time position with collateral duties that will support other needs the city has. And that's the problem, you know, we talk about how busy everybody is, how limited staff, you know, for $50,000 additional, we have 1,600 plus more hours of productive labor that we can contribute to other needs. Because code enforcement, again, we need to get it in place, and it needs to happen sooner than later.
Well, you know, I have to defer with you, Councilmember Powell, because there are other areas of city operations that really need a full-time person, especially in engineering and public works, and that has never happened. Equally with personnel and in-house. And you know, a full-time person also comes with union situations and benefits, and I don't know if that is something that is within the budget to do. So it's a difficult situation that I think we need to discuss further.
So I just have to interject one thing.
Yes.
Measure P, when it passed, was the cannabis tax, Senate vote Senate, with one of the emphasis is education and code enforcement. And it wasn't implemented because we didn't have a figure of what we could expect from the tax. That is now known. And certainly I realize it's nice that it's a general tax that's into the general fund and it funds city services. But the intent was to also have those in place. I don't want to try to take away from the others. They're all important, there's no doubt. But we currently don't have any code enforcement plan other than a collateral duty with one of our associate planners that we does a good job with a very limited time. But the objective is to have a full-time person really take a code enforcement because it's an important aspect.
Is that what the agreement was, and how, that's how Measure P read? I mean, we need to know that so that we know what demands to make too.
Well, again, I want to just clarify. It was a general tax, takes 50 plus 1 to pass. If it read with specifics, it would have required 2/3. We made a conscious decision to keep it in general, so we have control as a council, and we didn't want to restrict what future councils would do. But with that said, the intent was to at least have code enforcement and education program funded through this. So the last figure was over 400 plus thousand from the Measure P.
Which one was that we have in?
Well, from last year's, from the tax, it was 400, over $1 million. So $100,000 towards code enforcement seems a small piece of that. And again, if money is needed, I'm not suggesting it isn't, but so is the code enforcement program.
Well, if that's the intent of that, perhaps we need to converse about this in council.
Yeah.
And if we receive that much money, of course, you know, it's not secure funding either. It could be $1 million this year, it could be 500,000 next year, of course. And that's my concern.
Well, the council can also set the rate annually.
Yep.
So I think that for those of us who came into the game after this was passed, And, you know, there's a historical understanding that you bring to the table, which is essential, Joe. And we all need to be reminded of this so that we could make true sound decisions about this money that, yes, it's going to the general fund, but also it was the trust of the community on the council. We'll pass this, but you're promising X and Y, and I think we need to respond to the community.
Well, again, it's a needed service, and we need to figure out a way to provide it. This is a good first step. I just think 8 hours is not really gonna do the job. And there is overtime. These are minimal. If they work overtime, it raises the rates, and it's gonna, you know, and we would have no control of it. If we have a big case that they're working for several cases, it may take more than that, and that would generate a higher bill. So, I mean, this is just bare minimum. I think having our own well-trained in-house person who has support from both planning, building, police, and once they get to that level, we have a productive person that has collateral duties when things aren't real busy that offset some of the workload. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts. We could have this, you know, at the council and talk further, but I think it's a good step.
But I also think that it's important that we have feedback from Teresa, from Policeman, and from Rafael, to see, you know, what our perception is of what we see as a need for enforcement, and what they are seeing as the issues that Cloverdale has. Because the last thing we want is another blanket policy on enforcement. So we need to tailor it to what it is that Cloverdale needs, what are the problems. And of course, there are a couple of those that come to mind immediately, which is blight, and as Councilmember Powell said, weed abatement, which has a lot to do with the responsibility of owners of the problem. And how is the city going to engage in any kind of compliance with what's expected of our institution in terms of.
Well, I'll talk to those three and try to get their understanding. I do talk to Mark Harris a lot, and he's really concentrating on building stuff. So typically, someone building a house target and he comes out, but he tries to find something.
So it will be good to see what are these three, you know, these three stakeholders. What is it that they see? What is it that they have to engage with? What is the cost? You know, how does that compare to what, you know, you're proposing and what we envision?
Okay.
As council, you know, so that we make a sound decision that is good for all. Go ahead, Joe.
The other aspect is, you know, what degree of training they have, what's their comfort level of following through on these. I don't know, but in the code enforcement aspect, because it's like anything else, you're not sure of the next step, you tend to rely on legal advice. So the conversations with the city attorney, and those all generate costs. I mean, they're not direct where we could see the line item, but there's costs. So once you've received the training and you understand the role and you've been through it, you don't rely on those outside resources, and that reduces those costs. So there's a lot of different things that come into the equation.
So staff's prepared to bring these forward as alternatives for council consideration on how to move forward.
I'd like the CalPERS broke out into that number, because that's not a general fund impact, so I want to make sure that's identified.
Should we identify, I mean, one thing we didn't identify is, you know, if we do bring a new person on, we'll have to probably equip a new office area, a new computer. There'll be one-time expenses.
Yeah, don't be vehicle and budget that would be good, sorry. Yeah.
We'll think it through.
Yeah.
Put it all together.
Was there any other alternative? These were the kind of the two. I mean, the other one that we talked about was kind of revamping your in-house how we provide services now, getting clear on policy direction in terms of implementation of code, and we've been, the attorney and I had conversations around, one of the challenges we've had when we engage in this effort is the need to really comprehensively update our municipal code. Again, that would be something we could do after we hire a person that could be their task. What's a model code enforcement code that we might want to consider that more addresses the policy concerns of council around things like basketball hoops in the streets, like we don't really have guidance for those kinds of things, but those are things that we need to develop, regardless, for the question, do we do that time-wise first, part of the consulting system, or with a full-time person? So those are just some things that we do. Those are kind of weave into the alternatives is we develop policy around it. But with your direction, we can move these two forward, consultant versus full-time personnel, so the two key alternatives.
That's fine. And again, I just feel, the consultant, we could, I'd support giving it a try. But I do know the costs will go up. I mean, those costs are not locked in. I get the car, I get there's on space for a computer. I understand that. But I just want to see us get somebody in place or a program in place that addresses the issues. That's what we're talking about, is the violations that are out there. I mean, over on Real Time Casino, we've had that code enforcement effort going, and it's still a problem. That's not the result. And it's been several months, 3.5 months. So I don't know why. I know there's a lot of steps, but to me, the quality of life, the services to the community, that's what we're trying to get here. And so if you can, come up with a better way, I certainly want to hear it. I'm just looking hour for hour, 1,600 additional hours a year is a lot of staff time to help offset. And there is schools available that will help train them. So I just think once we had a good qualified person in-house that we can direct accordingly, it's going to pay dividends versus the contract, where every time you call, it's going to be a new charge if they exceed that.
Right.
So it's a problem in that regard.
Yeah, we would still have 4 people in code enforcement. A full-time, the police department, and with Teresa, and she would be doing specific code enforcement. This person wouldn't be doing code enforcement.
Teresa doesn't do code enforcement.
What
She
Teresa-
does traffic.
Teresa's doing the ADA program,
Yeah.
safe fund program.
Traffic.
It is a, for that, like I said, term code for type of activity that's geared specifically towards abandoned vehicle abatement. So that's a separate entity really altogether.
So
That's
if
what she
they
does.
were to be a code enforcer full-time, it wouldn't touch that.
No, Teresa would
Because-
handle that
because
ADA,
that's-
which she has done every time we ran that program.
Okay, and then when it comes to Rafael, what specific code
That's
enforcement,
mostly planning related things.
money related, and then
I'll
what
go
would,
into private property, issues.
and what would Coastland be doing? Because this person wouldn't be able to do the construction, or would it?
Well, Coastland does, like I said, Mark Harris, if he sees the job happening without a permit, he takes care of that. We call him and ask him to go out and look at something, he'll do that. So he does handle the building aspect. He's very qualified at the code enforcement, he did it for county for a number of years. So he's a good source to talk to about this.
So I see with this new code enforcement, chapter 8.02 of our municipal code, which is nuisance abatement. It's got nothing to do with what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Chapter 8.16, which is weed abatement. And chapter 18.15, which is cannabis. That's what I would see this person focusing on. And then there would be other collateral duties in the job description that would also, during slower times, would be able to. But again, it would be a team approach, meaning they work with the fire marshal if necessary, with the planners, with the police department, and they collaborate on those. But that would be the main focus of that position. Currently, there's really nobody doing that.
Any issues with the cannabis not complying with enforcement? I mean, with guidelines.
So we do our twice annual inspections, and the gentleman who comes in from HDL, the former police officer, very knowledgeable about California cannabis laws. And come in and say, I need to see your videotape from 3 months ago this date, so they're supposed to keep it for 3 months. He walks through, he looks at the doors, everything, the locks, looks at the seats, and then he generates a report to them, for them to correct those. And, you know, everyone typically gets something. You find something in all of them. Some of them are bigger than others. I think the Garden Society, so they were the ones that didn't have any violations, but typically it's something like a videotape or they're not counting the garbage has to be handled a certain way, the waste, very intricate law about. Generally speaking, though, there's been nothing egregious that would cause the state to take issue with the license or with the license.
And that should service any behavioral or sale to minors or.
Again, very minimal. We did have one case to address the location of Cloverdale Boulevard. We addressed it, understood or misunderstood initially. And then
Yes.
once we educated them, nothing, every now and then you have some reporting on others and we check them out, but for the most part, nothing.
All right. Well, this is definitely, something that we have to address. We have to talk about for the benefit of the community and benefit of staff and those of us who are policy making. So I thank you for the time. Do we have anybody hands up in the public?
No speakers.
Do you have any
Yes.
comments?
Some years ago, I had a neighbor that had some cannabis plants. And the odor became so overwhelming. I mean, I still have some, but it's not like this. It was horrible. You couldn't go out in the yard. I was really ticked off because I spent a few $100,000 in my house and I wanted to sit out in my backyard. Well, you had a community enforcement officer. He came out and yes, the guy had numerous plants, way over the amount that he was supposed to have. And evidently he told them you have to remove those. And then the officer came to my house and said, I've spoken with the person, they know about this and they're going to remove them. And then evidently, like, I don't know, a couple weeks, maybe a few weeks later, he came out to that residence again to be sure, he did a follow-up, to be sure that they actually did what they were supposed to do. Then he came back to my house and he said that they have been removed. If you have any further issues or problems, let us know. So full time is what you need, because there's a follow-up aspect. It's not just a one-time visit. Sometimes you have to go 2-3 times. And we do need more enforcement in our community. So it's really important. And just what Joe said too, is you should feel safe in your neighborhood. You don't want rats, you don't want the weeds growing high and potential for fire. I mean, this is something the city council is responsible for. So I think the full time.
And what other issues, may I ask, do you see as a community member needs to be followed up with when it comes to enforcement?
Well, there's,
I mean, you can give us a couple of examples. I mean, we need feedback from the community.
Well,
And we encourage the community to really speak to all of us or to some of the community stakeholders. So that when we make decisions, you don't jump at the last minute oh, you didn't do this, that's why we have subcommittees, that's why we're going through with the communication. That's how we're engaging in different kinds of presentations to the community and so on. So it's important that we have community input. Sometimes we assume things, but it's better when we hear directly from our constituents.
Well,
Madam Chair,
Joe already mentioned,
I just want to say, we hear through the community. They don't come to the meetings, but they certainly get our ears, as you know.
Oh, yes.
And it's important. That's why we talk about it. We bring it back to the council as a, I'm sorry.
no.
It's just that there's very many other people that don't speak up, and we are trying to encourage many more to come forth. So go ahead.
Well, when you say about people not speaking up, this is just my opinion. I feel as a city council, what do you want to see your community to be? You want neighborhoods that have like pickup trucks in the front with a bunch of junk and a car that's not being used, and there's a pickup truck in the neighborhood that's got a washer and dryer on the back end of it, it's been there for 2.5 months, Then there's neighbors who have stuff in their backyard, rats are starting to come in, that's unhealthy for your neighbor. The cannabis smell, I mean, what do you want to see the community be?
Oh, okay. If I tell you everything I want, people will be very upset with me.
Well, no,
I don't want to
isn't
see.
that, when you start looking at what you have your plans, I would think that would be considered.
Of course.
And it's just like what Joe was saying, is that there's a lot of stuff that's been going on, and we really need to have enforcement. And if you don't care about that, then fine, then you're gonna have neighborhoods that look pretty junky.
And believe me, there's so many violations in terms of how city property is damaged, and I do agree, if we have some enforcement, some of this common property will be protected. And the neighborhoods will feel like neighborhoods, not like junkyards. Having junkyards next to your house and things like that. So, but we need education, we need outreach, and we do need enforcement. So let's see how we come about this. So, any other closing comments? Joe, Susie, Chief, you have direction?
Yeah, we'll bring this forward for council. We'll outline really the two alternatives, going to be consulting versus full-time staff.
Okay. Thank you very much. And COVID-19 pandemic? Chief?
So we still have item 5.
I don't have F on my agenda. What is F?
It's the memo from me.
On executive.
Salary schedule.
It's not on my list here, but go ahead.
We'll have to find that on your,
No.
do you have an agenda down there, Susie?
My agenda? Okay, go ahead.
I have the agenda.
Well,
Yeah.
that's okay, go ahead. It's just my agenda that I have right in front of me as A, B, C, D, E.
Schedule.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little. Dave, do you want me to start?
You go ahead, please.
We kind of talked about this a little bit before the meeting, but the little background is that 2 years ago, we kind of ran into this scenario where Christmas fell on Thursday, and then so Christmas Eve was Wednesday, and we decided at that time that we would close for the whole week and allow the employees to have time with their families during this time. It's typically a very slow time of the year, and I think we were short-staffed at that time as well. Last year, of course, everyone was home. We allowed employees to take their vacation time in addition to their vacation in holiday time during the week of Christmas and New Year's. And so this year, what I'm running into is have 4 employees, and all 4 of them, of course, want to take the same exact week off. And they're all entitled to 3 3 holidays. So I either have to say no to some of the employees and tell them they cannot take their holiday time, or we close, or we have only one person in the office, and that I don't think is great. I very don't like the idea of only one person in the office at a time. So I reached out to a couple of other cities to find out how they were handling this, because we're kind of all in the same scenario where the holidays fall on the weekend. And so we have to either make up these holidays or pay them out. If we pay them out, it'll cost the city approximately $19,000. And when I reached out to Guilford, Windsor, Petati, they're all closing for that week. And then Sebastopol is considering doing that. They're, although employees are entitled to 3 days, we would be closed for 4. They would have to take a vacation day once, and they will use some type of paid leave that's in their bank already. After discussing it with my employees and everybody in City Hall, they have all agreed that they would be willing to do that. I did let them know that, this is just something I'm going for the council with to, propose that we just close for the week. And, they're going to be a policy, but everyone was amenable to taking paid leave.
It's just a couple points. The year before last, this was a similar situation. We approached the finance and the subcommittee at that time. The recommendation was yes, we closed for the week. Of course, we properly, we noticed that they were closed during that particular period of time. And we really experienced very little concern about being closed. And I'd say little, I don't receive any complaints. And I think in this situation, whenever we had floating holidays fall on a weekend, we encourage employees to take that leave during that pay period. And so that's where logistically it's tough. How do you factor in 3 days off during a 2-week pay period? And so you always end up with, because it applies to senior staff as well. So you end up with we have such a small staff, and that's really a reflection of the issue. And how do we end up really having 2 people on a week? And particularly, I end up being there working the whole time, but that's okay. I mean, that's my responsibility. I don't take the days off, but that this was a reflection again of opportunity to enable everybody to kind of take that same week off, use those holiday days, minimize staff disruptions, and do it at a time when City Hall is experiencing very slow activity traditionally. And it's kind of there is extra added perk because this is an opportunity for staff to kind of be away and be with their family during kind of an important holiday. That's what's reflected. Susie asked me if she could bring it forward, and I said support it. One, because we have them in the past, it had minimal impact, and it has a beneficial kind of impact in terms of our holiday payout cost. So that would kind of especially here is an opportunity for us to then also encourage employees to use a little bit of their leave balance during that one other day. So that would think that's good because we get that kind of get off the books.
Is that only office staff? Or is it for public works?
This is only for City Hall staff. Public works staff continue to, they would schedule accordingly. Or again, we're not. No one's getting free time off. It's just a function of if you give collapse all that time into 1 week, you can close so that it facilitates everybody taking the leave on the same day. That's really what it is. Whereas public works employees will have the flexibility to take those leave times off. They have more flexibility from the scheduling perspective.
So if I'm reading it right, because the
Yeah.
24th 24th is a city holiday, and that's on a Friday. The 25th is on a Saturday, and the 31st is on a Friday. Those are 3 city holidays.
So
Right?
it's the first.
Well, the first.
New Year's Day, not
Okay, so that'd be the first. So those are the 3 holidays, and they would be taken the week of the 27th.
the 27th through the 31st.
And that would generate 1 day of vacation, 3 holidays. So they'd be off, so City Hall would be closed from Friday the 24th till January.
The third,
Third.
the third, opens on the third, third is a Monday. And the second is a Sunday.
So if somebody needed, like, come in for an application or something, they have to come back.
So we have
it
applications
online.
online, and we also have them right outside the building now. Also, if there's an issue, anyone in dispatch, which our number would go to dispatch, our number would roll to a answering service, but if someone needed service, if there was an emergency, they needed start service or stop service, they would change dispatch and call the person that's on call.
And would there be, would you be posting on the door as well as calling when it goes? Would a live person answer the phone?
Our answering service.
But that would be a live person, not a recording.
Yes, like,
And they would have instructions on how to contact who if it was needed service.
And hopefully we'll be in Cloverdale Connect. So people will have that available.
And that, you know, I mean, I think this is a doable plan. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I would ask that there be something posted on the door that explains if you need X services, whatever. Because I've heard complaints where a contractor comes in and they need something, but then they find out that the city's closed. And I think that could cost money and that could impact the project. And so I think if we think through those, and there's a mechanism, so we don't run into that kind of a problem, then I think that's.
I need to ask, those open golf, this is how we do applications.
All building permits.
And all building permits are
Right.
there.
But I'm thinking of a contractor that needs something. I mean, like, where they go in and it's on a Tuesday, but now they find out it's closed to the following Monday, and they need to talk to somebody. I just think through that process, so there's a number they can call, and somebody can call them back and hopefully get it worked out. So they don't have to wait or lose a week. But I remember when we had City Hall closed, it was really long.
our building services are, what you're discussing right now, I believe, and I think most of our contractors have our building inspector number,
Right.
but yes, it is definitely.
Have it available.
Yeah.
And I'll take advantage of this conversation now and ask, how is open golf working when it comes to all these applications and relations to contractors, and how have you spread it out to the contractors, et cetera?
Well, I think we started out really slow, and Mark Harris was really selecting which permits he wanted to do online. But now he's very comfortable with it, and I think it's much better service. We had folks driving from the Bay Area to come up to get a solar permit, which is really a permit that they can get over the counter, which is done quickly and easily. All of that has changed, and my personal observation is there are less people coming into City Hall. I think we do have it available in City Hall. If someone doesn't have a computer, they can come in, fill out a permit there. We're doing our special event permit online, and that's working out really well. We've had a few of those go through. Business licenses also online. So generally speaking, I think it's going really well. I haven't heard anyone complaining. I've gone through the process myself. It's not hard. It's kind of what we do every day in our life now, going online, putting information in, and
Yeah.
It almost gets more convenient because folks can do it, you know, any time of the day. And even with permits, it was generally, Mark was kind of his office hours were 1 to 2. So it was kind of limited because otherwise he was trying to get out to do inspections. And this kind of freed him up, to focus on inspections, which, I think has been, the contractors find that beneficial because they get a little bit better inspection service. Only because it often you get stuck in those hours, really trying to help folks with their permits, and a lot of it is the payment process. He's working with AP, so now that's all just done online. So he gets out in the field and focus on inspections, which I think.
You know, it would be very nice if at some point we have like a short presentation and talk.
Oh, what, I'm sorry.
A short presentation, council, on how this is working since it's like, you know, instituted. And to compare how many people came in, how many people are working online, and to also say, you know, any problems, come, we'll teach you, we'll go through it in the computer, at City Hall, and,
Well, I know Susie's helped me with the building permit.
yeah.
But maybe that's something we could do in the first of the year,
In
maybe.
the first of
Get
the
a
year.
little bit more.
Exactly, because, you know, you guys have engaged in purchasing and giving services that a lot of people don't know about. They don't know about it until it's time to go for building or something like that. So,
And just to remind the subcommittee that, you know, the big piece of OpenGov was the budgeting in the transparency portal, and that's on our website. And I know our members of the public may be interested in having you know, more expenditure data. So it's real time. You can really take a look at what expenditures have occurred to date. Maybe not every line item, but at least the percentage of expenditures in the budget, and also where we are from a percentage perspective for the year. So I think there's a lot of transparency built into the system that enables the community to, you know, first looking at a static budget is actually looking at what's been spent to date, you know, right at your fingertips from your iPad and computer. I think it's I use the tool. I like it, and I know staff we were talking about today for our own internal budget tracking. You know, we see that. We had to do a lot of manual processes before, whereas now it does it all for you. So it's kind of I think we're going to continue to gain efficiency from using it. It makes the budgeting process a lot easier, and then the hope is we're going to be able to transition maybe to a 2-year budget with council support. And so, you know, then it'll all be there, and you can really see what the impact is from of that moving to a 2-year budget. And I think there'll be a lot of time saving too. You know, doesn't mean we can't adjust as we go along. We're going to cut out a lot of effort of kind of continuing to develop, you know, 2-year budgets or 1-year budgets by developing a 2-year financial outlook, giving council a little bit longer time frame to look at some of our projects and initiatives. I think that's valuable, and it's kind of one little snapshot.
okay, well, thank you very much, and I think that really, it will be very good for all of us to have engagement. So, now we have the mayor's bill, the attorney, legal board.
Yeah, we included in the packet a matrix that was prepared. I want to thank Shannon for her work on that. She put together a matrix that broke down the legal expenses by kind of major functions or categories over the last 2 fiscal years, both 1920 and 2021, and that's what is reflected in your packet. Maybe just high level, we generally budget somewhere in the neighborhood between 275 and 300,000 annually for legal expenses. And that runs the gamut for, of course, attendance at council meetings, labor and employment. So sometimes we'll see an increase in labor and employment depending on whether we're in a particular negotiating period with our labor groups. Of course, this year there's a lot of COVID-related laws that we requested input on, and then you also see some kind of specific project-related expenses that are tracked by our city attorney, and then there's the utility, water, sewer, airport, and then housing. So this how Myers-Navi breaks up their legal bill, and this is a reflection of kind of those rolled up into those particular expenditure categories.
And what is specifically city management?
So city management kind of it's not just for the city manager, it's really good for things like.
It's the team, the management.
Yeah, so attendance at council meetings, review of agenda packets, discussion with council members, kind of all general legal matters related to administration. Local government. So that's where you're going to see the greatest expenses. Jose does a great job in making sure the agenda, reviewing all those agenda items and materials, but also attending the meetings, participating, especially in our senior staff meetings and those. So that's a reflection of that concept.
Any comments?
So I just, what is the variance on 146? Take on the 2021 year, where it's 146.
So you had a total expenditure of $251,000 and first one's 100. We budgeted $298,000, we came in under budget. So it's like, $146,000.
And it's just a matter of the subcommittee, you want to see this stuff once a year, you want to see it quarterly, we can do it however whatever makes sense.
Well, I asked for this to be put on the agenda because my question really was, I mean, city management, you kind of alluded to it, but I guess I want to try to kind of get our arms around how frequently we call the city attorney. And if, we went through this several years ago with the cost, it's like everything else. That's why I get a little gun shy on the code enforcement, the hours, because the more hours, the higher the cost. So it sounds good, 40 for 950,000, but you have a couple of bad cases, and you're adding hours, so now the budget's 80,000 because you went over, and it just concerns me. And I often ask myself, is there training we could do for our staff that would help alleviate picking up the phone to the city attorney? I know in law enforcement, you don't typically pick up the phone to the attorney unless you really have a legal issue that you've got to walk through. But I know in some things, dealing with other, minute things, people aren't comfortable, not sure. First thing is you call the city attorney's office, they get their staff involved. And I think the cost it seems high to me. And we really focused on that some years back to try to bring the number down. So the reason I just wanted to see it, I just was curious. I would like to see if we could get maybe a breakdown, try to figure out, not to see what we can do as a city to maybe try to reduce that without increasing liability. I'm not suggesting we not call on a legal issue. What I'm saying is where we could maybe try to develop ourselves, our staff, where we're more comfortable making decisions short of going through each one. So I just, for a small city and a limited staff, we tend to use our city attorney a lot. In the area that sometimes I question whether we need to be reaching out.
And I think it would be comforting to the whole council if maybe you could compare what is the cost of, let's say,
example. And
Yeah.
They have a city manager and a city attorney all.
Yeah.
One guy.
Yeah.
That changes the task.
But, you know, that's a great ask. We can ask the day if we, you know, or we can ask our colleagues.
Yeah, because I think that will give a reference, right, to the council, to the community,
Right.
that it's not only Cloverdale who does that. And if we do, they do, how much difference is there? And again, what can we do to train our staff to, I mean, in the last few years, between fires and COVID and drought and letters to the water board and incorporating land and property into the city, I mean, that's all legal. And that's all city managed. So, you know, I'm sure that some years will be lower, some years will be higher. Perhaps we need to see what has, you know, like, what issue have been the most salient that have had the most demand on legal service.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I think, you know, to kind of touch on the topic earlier, I mean, you know, Jose is, and the city attorney's office is an integral member of our senior management team. You know, we have a pretty lengthy staff agenda. We've got a lot of topics, and, you know, we do ask the day to participate. You know, that would be an area we'll always say, don't participate, we'll call you if needed, but I think he's able to give us critical feedback on some of the policy issues that we're confronted with, like some of the development issues that are coming forward. We do have personnel issues. You know, at least my feedback that I've got is that we tend to engage less than our counterparts with our city attorney, but, you know, that we have to do that.
But then, you know, the council, our constituents, and that's part of transparency. And we trust that everything's being done right, but people don't know, and people question. And now with open golf, they're able to see all these things, and they're gonna have questions. So more questions than they had before. So the next thing would be,
May I make a comment?
yes,
With this, the neighbor, the 305 Fortino, I think we got the attorney involved a little bit too, but the community officer he could have taken, he or she could have taken care of that instead of having the attorney contact. Correct?
Well,
it depends
That
on the level
alleviates some of it.
of the process.
it would depend, but normally, yes, they could get it to a certain level, but once it gets into the deeding court documents, the attorney would get involved. But, and again, I wasn't using that as the example, but I was just looking more generic, or things like code enforcement, things like whatever, to get a kind of a better understanding, or things we could train our staff that would prevent the fault of the attorney. Things that we do, I'm not suggesting we not include them as part of the team. I think it's critical because it plays a critical role in it. That's why I was adamant about the team building as well. I think he's a critical member. But with that said, I'm at my own mind, there are things that we can do in growth for our own staff where they may, instead of making that call, they're confident they know the rules, they can make that call comfortably. And again, if you're not comfortable, you make the call because liability is high. But normally, there's other ways besides calling the city attorney in some of those situations. So, anyway.
Okay, all right, so, any issues from COVID or any ongoing things?
Madam Chair, the standing items, it's really at your direction if there's any of those, that you want, you know, they're really designed on the agenda for any updates. There's some of these we may not have real updates.
I think we've discussed about everything here, that is standing, and, you know, our homelessness, meetings are going really well. I'm very happy with everything happening, and what we have for the future. Report on water sewer customer account delinquencies, we kind of discussed that. Do you have any further comments on that?
Well, we wanted to there is a financial impact to our utility system. So we just want to make sure that the finance administration subcommittee was advised, and I think it's a short report for the finance director to prepare. You feel confident to do kind of a roll up, and then maybe an update on the arrearages program as we continue. That's obviously in development, and that will help respond to those accounts that are needed.
Okay.
And what, we, as staff, we've been putting a lot of time and effort into SB 1383. There's going to be a number of actions that we'll be bringing forward for council as well, but we'll need to bring those back to this subcommittee for additional review. There's an MOU with zero waste, as well as a proposed draft ordinance that we will be considering or looking for council consideration, along with we just received a request for a rate amendment from Ecology that's out of schedule because they're looking at what costs they're going to incur to comply with 1383. And so I'm asking for a third-party review of their request, and we'll be bringing that forward to for additional funding for the program.
Well, on this point, anything else? I'm overdue for coffee, and I cannot have it, so I will not sleep.
I just want to thank the staff. Thank you all. Thank you, Shirley, for being here.
Yes, thank you very much for your thorough.
Yvonne, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Adjourned. Thank you.
There's a lot here.
Yeah, and the last one